sewer fund back in the black, and it actually was this year, cash.
Okay, we had a little bit of a technical delay, but I would like to cash there this year. All these are on employment stuff. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, we gotta tell you, it's a heavy heart, right? Read this next agenda item because it'll be the last one of my presidency. I was thinking about maybe having insurrection. Stay on. President for life. Anyway, this item number 2 is public comment, and as you all know at this time, the public may address the board on any non.
Russ?
Uh-oh.
Roll call.
Roll call. Well, I messed up already. Would you please see who's here?
This is why you're on your way out.
I'm on my way out. See who's here.
Director Underhill.
Yes.
Director Cicada.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
President Thomas.
I'm partially here. But,
And Director Rademan.
okay. All right, starting again. This is a time when the public can address the board on any non-agendized item. The public is encouraged to work through staff to place items on the agenda for board consideration. If there is anyone who wants to talk, are you ready to talk back there? Your husband's not going to talk today?
He can't hear you.
Okay, comments are limited to three minutes, and we cannot take any action on these items if they're brought forward. Okay, at this time, I'd like to declare a recess here for about a couple of hours or so, just so I can savor the gavel a little bit. But I need to turn the meeting over to Michael Minkler, who will conduct our election.
So at this time, I won't make a show of taking the gavel from you, but I will accept nominations for the office of president of the board.
I would like to nominate Russ to continue to be president
Oh,
for one more term. Why can't we do that?
No,
Unless anybody else wants to.
You can
step
nominate,
forward.
you can nominate him, but
well, I would immediately decline the nomination. I appreciate the gesture, I really do, but
Okay, motion fails without a second. Do we have another
I'll
nomination?
make a motion that we nominate Director Underhill as president.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Sorry, motion to close nominations.
I make a motion, we close nominations.
I second it.
Okay, roll call vote.
Director Underhill.
Yes.
Director Davidson.
Yes.
Director Cicada.
Yes.
President Thomas.
yes.
Congratulations, President Underhill.
Oh, thank you very much.
And so at this point, we can turn the gavel over to President Underhill to
We'll just
entertain
change
nomination.
signs? Or no, we don't
And
have to
change the signs?
I just get the gavel.
You just get the gavel.
Oh, okay.
Can't she move to the middle?
Don't I get a hug first?
Thank you, Russ. You did a great job.
Oh, thank you, Cindy, I appreciate that.
No, we don't have to. Yeah.
And President Underhill, you can entertain nominations for a vice president.
And I open nominations for the position of vice president.
I would like to nominate Cindy Cicada.
Do I have to take it?
Hmm?
I second.
All right, you guys are in for it if I ever have to run the meeting.
You don't have to if you're not comfortable with it. Yeah, we.
I'll do it, I don't care. You don't want to do
Then
it?
I don't think I'm ready yet.
So, and that's perfectly fine. Normally, it's kind of a rotation, but I think Director Davidson would be the next in
next
line.
time.
So if the two of you wanted to just switch.
It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, I'll make a motion, or
Well, I'd like,
rescind that one.
I'd like to, well, the motion fails for a lack of a second, I guess, huh?
Right.
I think there was a second.
There was a second? Okay, I will withdraw.
The motion dies
I
for
will
lack
withdraw.
of second.
No, I will withdraw my motion.
Oh.
And I would like to nominate Director Davidson.
Okay.
I second that.
Okay.
I make a motion, we close the nomination for vice president.
I'll second that.
That was a presumptive, maybe there's,
We're running out of people, you know, Scott, let's see,
want to
might have to
reconsider.
fight for it a little bit.
Yeah, Scott is gone, so, you know.
Okay, I'll second that motion.
Okay. Will you call the roll?
Okay. Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. This is really
Okay.
quite honor.
Next year.
Congratulate my vice president.
And we don't
It's
have
a lot
any-
like, it's a lot like being Pence, but
You kind of look like
about the
him.
same, it's about the same prestige.
And we don't have any new members, so I believe that's it. With that, we can proceed.
And if I could just take a minute, as I was lying in bed this morning, I was thinking, 2020. 2020.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And what I can think about is 2020, our clear vision, right?
Exactly.
So we have a vision for the CCWD staff, and we're going to kick it off by next year, you know, or maybe latter part of this year, getting ready with the board retreat, because I think it's very, very important that the board get together and decide what we're going to do, what's high on our agenda. We know,
For the year. Goals for the year.
yes, yes, what we're going to do and what we want to work on. And we're very fortunate to have Michael coming in with all sorts of new ideas and wonderful ideas, and we can work on expanding those so that we can be, so that we can have a lot of accomplishments this year. 2020, as I say, is key. So CCWD is a visionary. And so with that, we will go to item number 4, which is the consent agenda. And as we know, it's expected to be routine and non-controversial, and
I'll move for acceptance of our consent agenda.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Or do you want to call the roll? Call the roll?
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes. Okay, that was fast.
You're moving this right along, Bertha.
Big improvement.
Item 5, which is new business, and 5A. Are we waiting for Bill?
Unfortunately, Bill will not be here this morning
Okay,
because his schedule requires that he put out the utmost effort at the Copper Cove Water and Wastewater Treatment Facilities.
I
Can we
thought,
move it to next month's meeting or something, or?
how's the timing
I
for
think
that?
Bill would prefer that we move
Prefer
ahead.
that.
Yeah, I think he would too, yeah. Good morning, everybody. I just want to bring to your attention that at the recent American Waterworks Association Conference in San Diego in October, our own Senior Supervisor of Water and Wastewater Treatment, Bill Cardinal, was recognized with the George A. Elliott Memorial Award, which is the highest award for the American Waterworks Cal Nevada section. And the award is presented for outstanding service to the section by the presentation of the best paper, unusual contribution to committee activity, or exceptional effort to improve member and public relations and outstanding innovations in the waterworks field. So Bill really excels through AWWA at bringing folks to the table operationally and facilitating discussions at the many technical briefs at the WWA conferences. And he does an excellent job facilitating the cross flow of information. So the district felt it important that he be recognized for this receipt of this award and the efforts that he pushes through AWWA. He's a great ambassador for CCWD, and it's important that this information be brought to light to you.
Right, and it's informational, but do we have any comments from the board?
Good job, Bill.
Right?
This,
Good job. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're on our team.
this picture that we have in our agenda packet, I had to look closely to see for sure that that was Bill. I
Yeah.
expected to see him in his rough outs and stuff, so.
Right,
He
yeah,
dre-
yeah.
He dresses up pretty good.
He cleans up well. Yep.
Yeah, and I have observed Bill over the years, and he's quite a remarkable guy.
Yeah.
He's a good member of our community, and does a good job for the district.
Absolutely.
It's wonderful.
We appreciate him greatly.
I really enjoy the enthusiasm that he expresses after he gets to conduct a tour for the 3rd, 4th, 5th graders and stuff that go through the plant. I mean,
Yeah.
he lights up over that. It's
He really
great.
does. He really does.
Bill has, how many years with
I
CC?
believe he's at 20
I think
years.
I think he just reached 20 years with the district.
That's wonderful, yes,
Yeah.
and know Bill well, and I'm very pleased. And what I'm happy about is, I keep talking about recognition for CCWD, because with WWA, it's very, very important. I think we want to make sure that we are in there for Aqua also.
Yep,
Recognition from Aqua would,
yep,
be another excellent exposure for
absolutely.
this district, and so thank you very much for submitting him.
Great, yeah, thank you guys.
I just
Yes,
would
sir.
add that, Bill is, although I don't think I would describe him as shy, he's not seeking recognition, he's not seeking these kinds of things. But Damon and I talked about it, and we felt like we wanted to put it on the agenda and bring it to the board. We talk a lot about, we have a lot of challenges, and we tend to focus on the challenges and focus on the, I don't want to frame it as negative, but, we focus on the work that we need to do. And so when we have things like this, Bill's extremely dedicated to the district. He's an extremely skilled operator, and obviously very active in AWWA. We want to just make sure we're bringing these things to light and giving the recognition where it's deserved. So that's why we wanted to make sure the board was aware of this item.
I just have one more question. His responsibility, is he rotating amongst the,
No, Bill's
Or is
been
it
at
pretty
Copper
much-
Cove for quite some time, yep. So he runs the water, wastewater treatment and the reclamation there, and he provides a ton of insight to the other disciplines as well, distribution, collections, electrical and mechanical. Yep, great work.
because I did meet him up the hill. I thought that was,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe he started out at Hunter's, at the Hunter's Water Treatment
Right,
Plant.
right.
Yeah, 20 years ago, yep. Right.
okay,
Well, thank you guys.
thank you so much. And item 5B, presentation of the audited financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019 by Richardson and Company and Rebecca.
Hi, good morning. So we are pleased to announce the audited financial statements. Brian Nash from Richardson and Company has come here today to present the information that is included in that, kind of talk about what the auditor's responsibility is, scope of work that they perform in order to engage with the district. And I just wanted to thank staff for their hard work in doing this. I kind of came in at the tail end and finished up the kind of final pieces of it. But it's a lot of work to put it together. And they work really all year long to ensure that we're having fair representation of our financial picture for the district. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and invite Mr. Nash up, and I really appreciate him coming here today, and he can answer any specific questions that you might have, and he has a lot of information to go over.
Okay,
Good morning.
thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Before I get started, I just wanted to say how pleased I was when I heard you landed Rebecca Callen as your administrative services director. Worked with her for many years at with the Council of Governments audit that we do for Calaveras County, as well as the transit fund audit. She was always a beacon of light there at the county, so I know you're in good hands now. I'm presenting the audited financial statements as well as two, you should have two letters. One says a governance letter on it, and the other one says management letter. The governance letter is all the required disclosures that an auditor is supposed to provide to a governing body, and I'll cover each of the points in that letter in my presentation. The management letter is a letter of recommendations that we've come up with during our audits. One thing to keep in mind is that management is responsible for the financial statements, and our responsibility is to provide our opinion based on our audit. We provide an opinion on each proprietary fund, the water, sewer, and the public finance, what is that fund? The Public Finance and Authority Fund, where the debt is, as well as the agency funds on a combined basis.
Excuse me a minute, I'm sorry
Sure.
to interrupt. I don't think we have the management letter here in our board packet. It
Oh,
wasn't
yes,
the
it's right
finance
here.
one.
So it's right
That's-
here? Uh-huh.
Oh, down here, oh, okay. Thank you.
It says management letter right here.
It says
But it wasn't in the
management.
packet, it was over here. Thank you. So you were both looking for it.
It was.
Sorry.
Okay, so in the opinion, you have clean opinions on each one of those funds, no modifications of any kind, so nice clean opinions. Some required disclosures. The scope of our audit was consistent with our engagement letter. We didn't have any difficulties encountered during the audit, no disagreements with management, none of those unusual things that we'd be required to disclose to you. There's still one more audit that we have to do for you, which is a single audit. It's an audit of the federal money. It's a compliance audit of the federal money. We just did work on that to the extent we needed to get the numbers for the financial statements. That compliance audit is due by March 31st, and we'll make sure we get that done in time. That's the main grant you have in there is for the water treatment plant, so it's the compliance requirements related to that. So if you were going to take a look at the financial statements and you wanted to get a good overview, you'd start with the management's discussion and analysis. That's at page 3. That describes all the major changes and why those occurred. I'll kind of hit the highlights of what I think is important in the financial statements. If you turn to the balance sheet and income statement on page 14 through 16, I'm going to point out a few things. One of the things that's always been a concern for us is that the sewer fund cash has always been negative. So it's been running at a deficit and borrowing money from the water funds. Well, in your recent rate plan that was approved, I know there's a loan there to repay that. And I'm happy to report it is no longer negative. It's $145,000. The unrestricted cash is $145,000 positive at the end of that audit, June 30. So that's good news. One of the things that helped the cash, it originally looked like it was going to be negative, but there was some restricted money for the old pension bond that was released when that pension bond was paid off, and it became unrestricted. It was no longer had any restrictions. So that brought that, it moved money from restricted to unrestricted and made that positive. But so that's a good thing. I know in the rates that were approved, there's a plan to have enough cash that the sewer fund can pay the water fund back. The water and sewer funds both are restricted resources that need to be used for those specific purposes. So it is important for the sewer fund to pay the water fund back. And that was one of the central themes in the Vallejo bankruptcy, is that restricted money cannot be borrowed if there's not the ability to pay it back. The courts agreed with the city of Vallejo that even though they had a lot of restricted developer fee money that their general fund could borrow, if the general fund didn't have the ability to pay that restricted money back, they couldn't really do that. It's not legal to borrow that restricted money. So it is important to make sure you stay on track with the rate increases to keep the resources in the sewer fund adequate to pay back that loan. The loan was $1,023,000 at June 30, 18, and there was one payment made before year end, so they did make that payment that the plan showed. So that it's going to be repaid through 2028 with 2% interest. You'll see under non-current assets, you have restricted assets, that's the R&R and expansion fees. So those are restricted for certain capital items, so they're considered to be non-current assets. The balance of those restricted resources did increase a little bit during the year. The expenses the revenues exceeded the expenses. You'll see there's a public financing authority fund. That was where the grant that came from the USDA was originally recorded. And there was assets that were, there was a Reach 3A project that was paid for with debt that they also purchased. So the debt is still in that fund, but the assets were transferred to the water fund last year. So the only thing in that public financing authority fund these days is just the debt, and there'll be debt payments made over time to pay that back. So the water fund will transfer money to that PFA fund, the public financing authority fund, to pay off that debt. I'm pleased to also report that during this year, the OPEB and the pension liabilities, OPEB is the other post-employment benefits, that's the retiree health care benefits. I'm happy to report that those are flat, they didn't increase, which was good. And part of the reason I think that the pension liability, well, the OPEB liability is funded more than most of our clients, which is good. It's over 50% funded, and the pension liability is almost 90% funded. That's largely due to that pension debt that was issued during the year and provided to CalPERS. So you're in really good shape compared to most of my clients. Many of my clients have no funding at all for the retiree health. And the pension is just what CalPERS has, which is typically around 70 or 80% funded. So you're in really good shape with those liabilities.
Excuse me, we did a refinance for the,
For the pension bond.
yeah, for the pension
Right.
fund.
And it's not necessarily a refinance, but
There's
you're-
additional-
Financed it, yeah.
There's
there
additional
are much
cash.
smarter people here that can answer that question.
It was almost paid off. The old pension bond was almost paid off, and so there was new money added to it.
Right.
That ended up going, I think there was over $5 million that ended up being sent to CalPERS to pay for part of that unfunded liability that existed.
And can I hear that again? We're in much better shape than a lot of us.
Yes, you're in much better shape than there's only one client that I think I can think of off the top of my head that's got better funding percentages than this district, and that was because it had a PG&E contract, and PG&E gave them a bunch of money to fund their liabilities before their contract ended. So it's really unusual. This is the highest level other than that one client that had a really unusual circumstances. So
And I think
proud of yourselves.
that's important to hear.
It is. That's a commitment to your employees. You've made a lot of governments have made that commitment and really haven't funded it. So the employees here can be confident that they will have resources there to pay their promised benefits. So that's a good thing. So let's see. So if you look at the bottom of page 15, net position is the difference between all the assets and liabilities. And the sewer fund still has a deficit of unrestricted net position. So there's a lot of the sewer assets are restricted expansion and construction funds. So the unrestricted net position shows up as a deficit. And that did go down a little bit, which is good news. It had been going up every year since I became your auditor several years ago. So this is the first year it went down a little bit. And so your rate study that happened last year or the year before came up with the rates that were needed to make that happen, and it seems like it's working. So that's good news. So it'll take quite a while to get that worked down, but I think you're on the right track. So if you look at the income statement on page 16, operating revenues increased 3%, but operating expenses before depreciation was flat, so that's good. There was less of a deficit before those restricted capital R&R fees than in the past. so that's good news. There's, towards the bottom, under other capital contributions, there was quite a big increase there, and that was for a couple of reasons. There was assets contributed in the Copperopolis area by developers that comes in as capital revenue. And the grants for the Jenny Lind treatment plant show up in that other capital contribution line item. So that's the reason for that big change. In total, the change in that position was 4.9 million positive, so that's good. Good news there. You'll see a restatement back in the 2018 column on bottom of page 16. That was to record the new way of accounting for the post-retirement health care benefits last year. So that's not an unusual item. Every government had a restatement, just to remind you about that. Okay. So the footnotes start on page 20, and they show all the accounting policies that are used by the
Could I
district.
interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
Going back to this page 16, where we're looking at the total operating revenue of 12 million, and then going down to the stated total operating expenses of 20 million for a net loss from operations of 7,600,000. Explain to me how that can be a good position.
Well, so that's fairly common because a lot of governments do have what's called non-operating revenues. So the revenues are separated in enterprise funds between operating revenues and non-operating revenues. So you have quite a bit of other revenues, property tax revenues, you have power income, and various other types of revenues that are also considered when you're considering how much revenues you need to bring in for rates from customers. So that's not an unusual situation. Nearly every enterprise fund that we audit has a negative operating income, but then when you consider the non-operating revenues, it typically changes. This is showing a net loss before capital contributions of 1.2 million, but there's various reasons for the rates that are created. Those consultants, they have it pretty well dialed in. They know exactly what you have available, what you have coming in from capital revenues, what you have coming in from non-operating revenues to make sure that you're fine. So what should be happening is you shouldn't be seeing the unrestricted net position declining over time. You should be seeing it holding steady or increasing. It definitely did for the I always point out the unrestricted net position for the sewer fund, and it did increase slightly. I don't remember, I didn't check to see what happened with the unrestricted net position in the water fund, but I think it did increase a little bit as well. So,
Okay, then the 100
you have to trust your consultant. They really do a good job coming up with the rates that you need to cover that operating loss that you have. Or, they know what other revenues are available.
Okay, thank you for that explanation.
Use that unrestricted net position as kind of a gauge of where you are.
Okay, and because we are in the third year of a rate increase, will that will help us next year while we're,
Hopefully, yes, that should. Your revenues are supposed to keep pace with the inflation on the expenses too. With the sewer fund, you also need to have, your rates need to be enough to keep up with expenses, plus enough to pay back that deficit in the past. So, your finance people should keep, Rebecca should be keeping tabs on how the rate increase is paying for all of the expenses that you have, and it should be reporting that to you regularly. So, it did look like that rate increase helped quite a bit in the sewer fund. I didn't pay as much attention to the water fund, but
yeah, which was our intent.
the sewer
because,
fund really did make a difference.
Yeah.
I wanted to pay attention to that and report that to you.
Because we've been hearing that for years
Yes.
about our sewer.
It was slowly deteriorating, so that rate increase was really important in our opinion. So with that, I'll move on to a couple of other things I wanted to point out in the footnotes. So you will see the pension bond on page 29. You'll see a long-term liability footnote. You'll see the pension bond come into the to the liabilities as additions. And it's split based on how the payroll is split. So that was a big increase this year. The old pension bond was paid off. You can see there was very little left to pay on that one. So let's see, on page, you have board-approved reserves. I'm going to have you turn to page 34. There's a net position footnote that shows the approved reserves on the right-hand side. You have 8.2 million of approved reserves for water fund and 1.9 for the sewer fund. Because the sewer fund has no unrestricted net position, we don't show any of those reserves being funded in the sewer fund, and there's $2.2 million of unrestricted net position in the water fund, and it shows which reserves. And that's just a choice made by the finance department, which reserves were shown as funded. So, you know, if the net position increases over time, those other approved reserves would be funded. So they're really not funded at the moment. So let's see. You'll see that there's pension and retiree health care benefit footnotes that start right after that page on page 34. And there's several pages of those footnotes that has lots and lots of information about these pension and OPEB liabilities. There's what's called required supplementary information for the retiree health and pension plan, which is on page 43. And one of the things I was looking at is that funded percentage on page 43 of the pension plan. You'll see a table at the top. The last line item is a fiduciary net position, which is your assets, as a percentage of the total pension liability. So you'll see in the June 30, 19 column, it's 89% funded, and you can see back in time in 17, it was only 74% funded. And that kind of changes with the investment returns that CalPERS has, but that's really well funded. You have the same information for the post-retirement health care benefit plan on page 44. You'll see plan fiduciary net position as a percentage of the total OPEB liability, 2/3 of the way down the page, 54% funded. So that's pretty good compared to most of our clients. So let's see. One of the things that we added to the financial statements a couple years ago was debt service coverage ratios. You'll see those on page 48 and 49. It shows the required ratio and then what the ratio turned out to be, and they're both for the water and the sewer fund. Your debt service coverage ratios came out well ahead of what was required, so those are in good shape.
Because that 1.25 stuck in my head.
Yeah, that's the requirement.
That was that's
so you're well above that. So both of the funds are doing very well for those required debt service coverage ratios. Okay, now I'm going to move on to the management letter. So we didn't have any new comments. When we first became your auditor, we looked very hard at the internal controls, how things are processed, and had a few recommendations, and a lot of those have been implemented over time. We did notice that after the administrative services director left, there wasn't anybody reviewing journal entries. They were posted by your accountant 3, Patty. No one was reviewing those. So if there is ever a time where your administrative services director isn't available, someone else needs to be assigned to do that. So we have that recommendation. We've always recommended that new employees be put into the payroll system by someone who doesn't process payroll. Payables, new vendors in the payable system should be entered by people who don't process payables. That's just a good practice to make sure that somebody can't add a fictitious vendor or fictitious employee. For some reason that hadn't been implemented apparently. We also recommended in the past that certain duties be separated related to the over-the-counter cash handling, posting of cash receipts, batches, and adjustments. So this is the people in the operations, sometimes they'll fill in to handle the cash, and then they can post the transactions in the receivable system. It's important to separate those duties. We recommended that, but management in the past said that they thought there was not enough cash there to really worry about, and that's a policy decision. We took this recommendation out for that reason, but then I think somebody asked that we put it back into the management letter. I think the board was interested, somebody on the board, I can't remember who it was interested in having them take a look at that. So we've left that in our management letter, even though the amount of cash that comes through the counter is not that much. It's just a best practice. Maybe Rebecca can take a look at that. We also recommended that the customer service manager produce a report and look at the accounts that are in the system and make sure that the active accounts are all being billed. That hasn't been implemented for some reason. So policies and procedures, there should be a capital asset policy that defines useful lives for depreciation, discusses what's a maintenance expense that shouldn't be capitalized versus what's a capital expense that should be added to the fixed asset records and depreciated. And then there's a few other items. We recommended that the cash reconciliation for the financial statements is kind of rough, and we recommended that Patty prepare a combined reconciliation in a certain format. I gave that to her, really hoping she does that. It's kind of a rough reconciliation for the audit. The depreciation list that we have now in the accounting department is a little bit lacking in some of the fields that it has available on it. So I'm recommending that if you can't work with the software provider to add the fields that are necessary for us to know that the depreciation is correct, that maybe you ought to switch software providers.
You did?
So then, let's see, we recommended policies and procedures over areas be documented. Patty did a lot of that. She knows so much. She has a lot of information in her head. I think she really needs to get that on paper in case something happens to her or she retires. Somebody has something to follow that shows how to process the transactions the way she does. She's done a lot of that, but she still needs to do some more.
If you could go back just one moment, and I'm thinking what you said, I thought I heard you say that an extraordinary repair, like a new engine for a diesel truck or something at $20,000 should be capitalized.
Yes.
Yeah, but in this weird world that we're living in now, where the California Air Resources Board can say, okay, well, that truck has got to be thrown off the road in 2 years. How do you do that? If you put $20,000 as an increase in an asset, and then it has to be thrown away, that's a complex and complicated, unfortunate circumstance. How do you deal with that?
I don't know that there's an answer to that question.
Well, I would just question, I would question the recommendation that we put an extraordinary repair of that nature as an increase in the assets, because it's like a repair to me. I don't know.
From an accounting standpoint, you should have a policy that says we're going to capitalize every item that's over a certain size that extends the useful life of the asset a certain amount of time.
How long?
That is up to that's a decision that can be made under the policy. So,
Seems like there'd be a standard 5 years or something.
Well, usually most of our clients use, if it's over a year, they'll capitalize it.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't necessarily need to be a year. It could be longer than that. It's a policy decision, and I'm sure Rebecca has some ideas about what she'd recommend. She has a lot of experience, so big organization that can weigh in on that. But that particular circumstance, that may be perfectly okay to not capitalize that repair. The typical rule, the normal rule, is if you do something that extends the useful life or increases capacity. So if you have a ditch and you increase the capacity, you don't just repair the cracked concrete on the ditch or repair the wood on the ditch, but you increase the amount of water that can go through it. You capitalize that. If you just have to repair you're just repairing what's already there, you'd expense that. With the truck, the same thing, if you've extended the useful life on that truck beyond your policy, then you would capitalize it. If you didn't, then you expense it as a maintenance.
That's
Well,
an interesting
that-
thought
I
about,
think Damon is shaking his head. I mean, I just suspect that there's, if we look back in the last couple of years, the huge expenses that we've had on repairing diesel engines on trucks that we very well may have to say goodbye to very shortly. And that's my concern. I hate that's happening in California, but I don't want us to be, this district to be, I don't know, kind of like doubly penalized by, you know, how do you just make a journal entry when you throw that truck away that okay with
So if you had a truck that's on the books, what would happen is there's a cost account, and there's an accumulated depreciation account, and then if you sell it, you have maybe some scrap proceeds. You compare it to the difference between the cost and accumulated depreciation, and that's a loss on disposal. So the difference between the cost and accumulated and the cash that you get in, that would be a disposal. That would be a loss on disposal. So that would be a loss that shows up in the income statement.
Well, you used to be able to sell them to recover some of that value, but the way the rules are written now, they just have to be, I don't know, dismantled and thrown away. But okay, thanks for that.
my thought is we could bring that to the finance committee.
We can review that policy to see where those limits are and whether that circumstance would require a change in the policy. Yeah, absolutely.
Note to self.
Keep going.
And so the only other item I have in my recommendations, and this is with the first year we did your audit, the district covered some cash deficits in the agency fund. So you'll notice in the back of the financial statements, there's several special districts that, or assessment districts that are accounted for by the district. And there were some of those, there was one of those in particular, I think, at the time that didn't have enough cash to pay its bills, and it was covered maybe by accident by the district. And so one of our recommendations early on is maybe come up with a policy of how to deal with that situation if you have these special assessment districts that don't have enough cash to pay their bills. You know, is the district really going to cover that, or are you going to make them pay it back with interest, that kind of thing?
What was that, Wallace?
I think I want to say it's a Lake Tulloch Fund, but I can't remember. It's been quite a few years since that deficit occurred.
That's fine.
So, all right. One other required disclosure in audit standards is what is estimated in the financial statements. The fair value of investments is an estimate. The allowance for uncollectible receivables is an estimate. Qualifying expenses billed to grants, that's estimated. That could be challenged by the grantor eventually if they look at it. The depreciable lives for capital assets. And the computation of the pension liability and the post-retirement health care benefit liability, those are estimates based on actuarial studies. So I guess the last disclosure, we had 19 closing entries and adjustments during the audit. It's a bit more than we like for efficiency purposes, but your finance department does a pretty good job. So with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Do we have a
those.
way to reduce that?
Yeah.
Your
And
recommendations?
partly
Yeah.
by Jeff leaving also when he
Yeah,
did. So-
probably, yes. Patty was kind of overwhelmed with work this year. One of the things I've talked about with Rebecca already is there's a lot of funds that are used for accounting that kind of complicates accounting. She might look at those to see if there's a simpler way to do things. So I think some of these adjustments that we do are because of the way the accounting's a little bit complicated by splitting apart all of the restricted money into separate full funds in the system. That maybe can be done a simpler way by showing a project for a restriction that has an income statement and just have a cash account maybe. She's going to look at some of those things to see if it's important to keep those funds or if there's a simpler way to do it.
Yeah, that's necessarily going to come up with a change in,
Yeah.
So I have, looking at the management letter with all the recommendations, and I spoke with Rebecca at the finance meeting. I'd like to know, out of all these recommendations, which ones do we already have in place? Which ones are you going to put in place, if any? And if not, then why? And it's either you or Michael or something, I'm not certain.
Yeah, so really, we have to sit down and go through all of them very, very thoroughly to determine, I mean, I think some of the things are, it's the way it's always been done, and so trying to kind of unravel that is not just finance deciding we're gonna make a change. There's, you know, potentially significant policies that would have to also be modified. So any of those I'll coordinate with Michael to determine what we need to bring forward to the finance committee, what we would need to bring forward to the board, and identify which ones we can handle. It's probably not something that we can just go through and do all of them over this next fiscal year, because it's gonna take time to kind of vet all that through, especially when you're talking about changing software. That's a multi-year endeavor. So, and some of those things we also have to evaluate. Is it because of how we set up the system? Is it just because of a lack of training? We're also a small district, so yes, best practices for sure in terms of handling cash. You always want to be aware of having that segregation, but sometimes when you only have one person, because, you know, 2 other people are off, or someone was off and then someone else called in sick, you really don't have a choice.
What I'm looking for is, and we could do this perhaps in January or February, so looking at the one recommendation, payroll disbursements, recommend entry of new employees. So can you tell me why you couldn't do that? That's kind of what I'm looking for. Well, we can't because we only have one person. Okay, and that's kind of just short, quick answers as to why we couldn't, or yes, we're going to, and we should have it implemented in 6 months or whatever.
So my suggestion would be, why don't we add an agenda item to the next finance committee meeting where we respond to each of the recommendations in the
I'd like to
audit?
just see that,
Yes.
because I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons why you can't, and I understand that, but at least to note that we're looking at them.
It's a new report, right?
The
The audit report.
The management letter is there every year.
No, but when was it drafted?
Yeah, there's nothing new in the management letter. These are some of the recommendations we've had in the past.
For years.
Yeah,
So
because
now
it
might be a
said,
good
yeah.
time to, you guys discuss them and see which ones and share
Absolutely.
with us.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yep.
we'll bring that
Thank
back.
And, you know, if the answer is it's gonna be too expensive to implement a control, we don't think it's necessary, that is a perfectly fine response, if that's,
Well, we
you
know with changing the software is like a big to-do.
Right, yeah.
And even though we'd like to do it, that may take,
So I wasn't suggesting that the entire system be changed, just the subsidiary fixed asset system. That's what I was saying.
I think we talked about
Subsidiary
one new
fixed
software.
assets. You have that?
Thank you.
Madam
Yes.
President, I just noted that Peter just came in the room. Peter, we just heard that there were 19 adjusting entries at the end of your interim. Would you like to come forward and explain? Well, we're just pleased that there was only 19. Good job.
So is there an action item on this? Do we
Okay,
have to
yes,
accept
we do
it?
have to have a motion to receive and file the audited financial statement.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Then, okay, only write half of that, Rebecca, and then Jeff will make the motion. Okay, second?
I
There was
second.
a motion and a second.
Yeah,
right.
okay.
Paul?
Call the roll.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We all can breathe a sigh of relief now, so.
Item 5C,
Yeah. Well, these-
discussion action, excuse me?
I'm just going to get a cup of coffee.
Oh, okay. I'll talk slowly. Yeah, regarding SB 998, amendments to the CCWD rules and regulations governing the furnishing of water and/or wastewater services. Mr. Joel Metzger.
Good morning. Shall we wait for Russ?
He can hear.
Okay. Well, this has been a long time coming. We've spent many months, if not years, working on this, and I'm pleased to say I think we've given this a really hard look and come up with a good policy that addresses the legal requirements from the state. And so I want to thank the Finance Committee for discussing this in detail a couple of times and reviewing it and making sure that staff was on the right course. Appreciate your help with that. So what we have today are 2 resolutions, and we are recommending that the board consider adopting both of these resolutions. One is to adopt the new SB 998 policies in terms of delinquencies, and then the second is to update our deposit policy to make sure that it addresses some of the new challenges that 998 brings. So basically raising that deposit amount up a little bit. And so these are the 2 resolutions that we are asking the board to consider. I do have a very detailed presentation with all the information that we have talked about in the past, and so I just wanted to ask the board, do you have any questions right off the top that we want to hit? Does the board want to go through that presentation, or shall we just take questions and then move on toward consideration? I'm open to either approach today.
Bertha and I went over it with
In
them.
detail, right, with Joel, and
I would recommend we just accept it unless you guys have read it and have questions, but I'm
Well,
good, just to save time.
The only question,
Director Thomas has a question.
no, well, it's more of an observation, but this is so complicated and has so many ifs and ands, and if this is true, then you handle it this way. If this is true, then you handle it a different way. My compliments to you, if in fact you understand it. It's quite remarkable, and you know, being able to make be sure that your staff understands it and can properly implement it is it's a challenge, and I'm sorry you have to go through it.
Yeah. Senator Dodd really got into this and just,
You know, and we adopt this, and as you go to use it and you find there's an issue, you bring it back and adjust it. So I think for a first start, it's a good first start and see how it works.
Well, if it doesn't work, how do you fix it? It's black letter law. You have to do it.
Well, I think it would be more along the lines of how you're working with somebody, saying, you know, this particular, let's say when we're talking about the payment plan, you know, we need to dial that in a little bit better, so come back to us. Right now, it's at 12 months, is that right?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. The Finance Committee looked at a staff recommendation of a 6-month maximum payment plan, and the recommendation for the Finance Committee was to extend that out to a 12-month payment plan. And again, that would be for just one bi-monthly billing cycle that would then be stretched out.
But also on that recommendation, I noted that it didn't have to be 12 months. It gave staff the liberty to start with whatever they do. Like, let's say, okay, we'll do 3 months, and the customer says, man, that's just kind of hard to pay that on top of my regular. Can we do 6 months? Or you start with 6 months, and they say, can we go 8 months? I wanted the flexibility. It doesn't mean that's what you have to give everybody. I thought the flexibility would be really important to work with customers and establish a good relationship.
and key to that is the monitoring of it, because you have to, that is so important.
Just so we make sure we're very clear, the staff recommended policy is still what's before the board right now. So we address that the Finance Committee recommendation in the staff report. But the policy, the proposed policy still is a 6-month repayment plan, and the reason why we settled on the 6-month repayment plan is there's multiple reasons. One is just the administrative burden of processing these payments and of all of 998. overall. We're trying to implement the rules and implement the law in a way that is as efficient as possible. We also we were concerned about, I think it's the board's discretion if we want to extend that repayment plan out beyond 6 months. We can accommodate that. My strong recommendation would be that we pick a number and we set it at that number, that we don't have
What bothers me a little bit though is at that finance meeting, I asked for it to come to the board at 12 months. We settled on 12 months and there was something else I kind of gave up for you folks. So why is it here today at 6 months?
So we added that recommendation from the finance committee into the staff report and brought the staff proposal to the full board to consider both of those
With the
options.
6 months, but it doesn't say the 12. Okay, that's here nor there. Can you give me an example? Let's say somebody's behind, you're gonna shut them off. You know, you're ready to do that. So what is the dollar amount that they could owe? And let's do the scenario real quickly. They owe 300, what is that magic number, 400? We kind of did it. And so if it's $400 to be paid in 6 months, tell me the math on that and on top of their regular payment.
And I think the other clarification is the staff's recommendation isn't to open negotiation between 2 and 6 months. It's 6 months. And so if the board wants to go for 12 months, then it's 12 months. We wanted to take away that inconsistency on a customer by customer basis because we have to set up a whole system in our utility billing software. It creates a whole different set of changes for the billing itself, a whole monitoring system that's going to happen with existing staff because we're not adding any new staff related to 998. So we were trying to find an effective way where we can compromise and allow payment plan for the one billing cycle, right? This is not an ongoing, multiple bills. This is for one bill and allow for it 6 months. So if you need that assistance, it's gonna be over 6 months. If the board wanted to go for 12 months, then it would be 12 months. It wouldn't be between 3 months and 12.
So
It
you're
would be
saying that
12 or 6.
you're
That's our
saying
recommendation.
That the customer, okay, if you need a payment plan, it's 6 months. Can't be 2 months, can't be 3 months, it's gotta be 6 months.
It could always be less, right? If they come in and pay
No,
it.
because then you're gonna do the
Well, they
same
could come
problem.
in
They
and
don't wanna
pay
do
it.
any more work
No,
to track
that's,
it.
you didn't, you're not, she just said they'd come in and pay it in 1 month. They could come in and pay it the next day.
Well, yeah, you can pay your balance at any time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But what we don't want to create is a system where we have different time periods on the repayment for different customers. That creates a huge administrative burden on the customer service and finance staff, but it also creates potential, a potential perception of inequity among
Well, I
different
can see
customers.
Customers. get
If somebody's
together,
getting a
wondering
shorter
why they
or
got 12
longer
months and why they
plan,
got 2 months.
So we feel very strongly that we recommend 6 months. If the board wants to go with a longer time period, that's fine too, but that we just pick one time period and we stick to that one time period and implement it that way.
Yeah.
One of the
My
things
question-
that I'm trying to get away
Okay.
from is, in my opinion, it seems like it's always what's best for the district to make it work better for the district instead of being a little bit more customer service friendly. I think everybody knows that I'm an advocate for our ratepayers and it's all about customer service. So if we can do that exercise and if it's an additional, how much money for these folks on top of their regular bill, how difficult can that, is it really gonna help them, which is what this exercise is for, is to help the ratepayer. And I just don't wanna
You know-
make it to where it's,
Okay.
To help them.
And we are all, we're all advocates of our
everybody should
customers.
pay their own stuff.
We're all
I get that.
advocates for our customers that sit on this board. And my question was, how many customers are we talking
Yeah,
about?
how many customers?
How many customers are we talking about, and what does that mean?
We do have spreadsheets.
It's about 70, 80 a
That's what I
bill
mean.
period.
Sorry.
How many
I just saw that
lockoffs
number
do we
earlier.
process every billing
So
cycle?
on, today is actually lockoff day for cycle 2, which has fewer, averages between 30 and 40 people that we lock off every 2 months up there. And then for cycle 1, which is West County, your district, and Copperopolis, we're usually locking off anywhere from 40 to 60, depending on what's going on.
And I also think it's very important for us, and we've talked a lot about this on the community outreach front, that we are very clear with customers that this is not a break from paying your CCWD rates. This is an extended payment plan for one billing cycle, and that's all. It doesn't mean you're getting a discount. It doesn't mean you don't have to pay the full freight. It's just an extended payment plan for that one billing cycle. So we want to be very clear when we're discussing this item that it's not the cap. That was actually assistance, for low-income customers. This is not that. This is simply a payment plan if a customer is having a hard time making a payment for one billing cycle.
And the law says you can only do it once every couple of years, right?
The policy says, yeah.
Policy.
The payment plan?
Yeah.
As soon as they have successfully completed a payment plan, they can then begin another one if they meet the requirements for it. So,
Oh,
but
I-
they cannot have one payment plan that they haven't completed and then ask for another and then another. That's prohibited.
Can I ask a question? On the deposits, now, so when somebody moves, they get their deposit back?
Right, so if they're no
I
longer.
mean, who's paying these deposits? Landowners or?
The only, the purpose of the deposit would be because we no longer can only have legal deeded owners be customers. This forces us to allow a non-legal deeded owner, which would be a tenant or occupant, to become a customer. And two things happen. One is, if there's an outstanding balance and that occupant comes to us and says, I want to become a customer, their balance goes to 0. The owner, their landlord, is stuck with that delinquent bill. And then this new occupant who is now a customer gets their own account number, and then they move forward with a 0 balance. And so
After they pay us the $300
if they pay us the deposit. So I put that in to protect us because we have no hammer to collect delinquent amounts if we don't have the property owner, because we can't put them on the tax rolls. And collections is extremely.
It's a waste of time.
It's a waste of time. So that deposit is more, 50 is nothing. At least we could get 1 month's or 2 months worth of bills from them if we raise it up. So that's the intention there. And Cindy, the math, just so you can think of 6 versus 12. So if you're water only, it's $20 over the 12 months, or about $38, $40 over the 6-month period. So 3 payments versus 6 payments. And then if you have water and sewer, you're looking at $50 a payment versus $100 a payment. And that's the 6-month versus
Over and above
the 12
what's
months.
Over and
Over and
above,
above what's
right.
due. So that's what we're actually deciding.
So $50 for somebody at a 6 months payment plan on top of their original bill. If it's 12 months, I mean.
If it's
If
12.
it's 6 months, it's $100 additional.
And that's if they had paid 0. I'm anticipating that folks will pay what they can, and it's only that remaining balance, which is probably not the full amount that they'll do the payment plan on. And
This is just an awful law.
it's going to be very difficult for us to administer and track this.
Terrible.
Getting back to what's best for the customer or best for the district, I can see how selecting 12 months conceivably could be more than double the effort time-wise here.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not, X for 6 months and 2X for 12. It'll be like 2.5 or 3X for 12, just because of the communication. And, oh man, my husband isn't working much during the holidays here and stuff, and so what can you do for me? I don't know that there's a solution to that, but it's just going to be a nightmare.
Well, I would pose this, because I know that there's legitimate concerns on, are we being customer friendly? Whatever we go with today, I'm absolutely hoping that I can come back and update the board on how this implementation is going. And I'm going to be taking careful notes on what the customer feedback is on it. And let's say we go with the recommended 6 months, and then I get a huge, overwhelming amount of feedback from people who say, this is too much, too fast, it's not working for me. I absolutely would want to bring that back and share that with the board and share that with staff and talk about it. However, if the 6 months works well for people and gives them just that little extra time, really this is only helping people who have a one-time financial hardship. It's not helping people who just simply don't have the money moving forward, because even though they get a little bit more time, that next bill is still due and it's even bigger than it ever was before.
And
So
if they don't pay as agreed, you can shut them off, is that correct?
if they miss a payment plan, they have a 5-day shut-off notice, and then they do get locked off at that point. So just as Michael said, the real evergreen assistance program is the customer assistance program to really help fixed income retired folks who just simply can't pay that bill. This is honestly not going to help very many people, and it's going to add a huge administrative burden for my staff. And we're going to follow the law, but we need to be very clear in our outreach that this is not a big gift. This is really, just a little bit of extra time.
Well, if the only issue seems so far is the 6 or 12 months, and I'm a proponent of the 6 month. I don't know if we should pull the board and move on, or
Go ahead.
keep talking about it. I mean,
Go ahead.
I'm for 6.
6. I'm for 12, but I'll vote yes for your 6. So,
Give
vote.
Do we have any?
them her telephone
no, I
number.
mean, we don't have I'm just, all I want to do is pull the board to see if to get that issue off the table and move it forward, so.
So we're good. Okay.
so make a motion.
Well, I don't know if his presentation's done yet.
I mean, I
Joe,
have all the
and-
information if you have questions, or we can simply go right to these motions. It's the board's pleasure.
Well, as I say, we brought this through finance and
Yeah, I'm pretty content.
explained there.
I mean, I think it's terrible
Discussed
law.
there, okay?
We could take 2 hours and I still wouldn't understand why it's necessary.
Well, next time you're in Sacramento, go see Dodd.
Done, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
okay?
Did I
Can
hear a
make
motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt resolution number, whatever's assigned.
Okay, 21B, is that the,
No.
Okay, amending the Cottage County Water District rules and regulations governing the furnishing of water and/or wastewater services, Article 3, application for service rates and billing section 21B.
right, okay?
So I'd recommend you,
Second? Oh,
you guys are,
excuse me?
seem like you want to be efficient today. If you guys want to just do one motion for both resolutions,
Oh,
you can just
okay.
do that with one
So
vote.
let me amend that
Okay.
to adopt both resolutions.
Okay, so it would be
One resolution then?
It's two resolutions,
2019, what numbers?
81 and 82.
81 and
Make a
82?
motion to adopt resolution 2019, 81 and 82.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Call the roll?
Do we have any?
Oh,
comments?
excuse me, comments, excuse me. Any public comment? No? Okay,
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
yes.
President Underhill, if I might just make one comment. I just want to commend Joel for a lot of hard, as you mentioned, this is an extremely complicated, burdensome law. You know, Joel's been involved with it from the legislative process all the way through to drafting and implementation, or well, now moving into implementation of the policy. And he did the heavy lift on this. So I just want to commend Joel for really good work on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael, but I also want to make sure that everyone knows this was a team effort, and everyone in this building had a piece in this, so thanks to everyone.
Okay, do you quickly want to go through your,
No, we're good.
That's a good point, Joel. We also relied a lot on input from the customer service staff and the finance staff. And now, I wish we could say, I mean, this is a couple of years in the works, and I wish we could say, oh, that was the finish line, but actually, the implementation starts now. So we have a lot of hard work over the next few months, and we'll see how this plays out.
yeah, and this leads to the fact that we're going to be having a series of town hall meeting?
So we've talked about the public outreach on this, and again, I think we need to be very careful and cautious about how we frame the messaging on it. We're working on scheduling town halls already, so I think we wouldn't do a separate one just for this item. We'll add it to, as a discussion point.
So the suggestion was thrown out that maybe we could combine that with something out of the county, so that would, if they have an issue that they'd like presented, maybe we could team up with them.
I don't like that idea at all.
You don't like that?
No, I don't like having joint meetings with the county, public meetings.
But I'll be in touch with each of the directors in the different districts on the public meetings.
But I also don't think this is a standalone issue to have a public meeting.
That's what we
Yeah.
had decided to.
Okay. Any other comments?
Just leave you with implementation is February 1st of 2020, so that's when this will go into effect.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joel.
All right. Go on to Mr. Peter Martin. Adoption of the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Sub-Basin Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And this is the big part of our board package.
And you read every page, right?
Probably could have been on the consent agenda.
I agree.
Morning, Madam President, members of the board. I had, looks like I must have grabbed the wrong presentation here.
Too bad you only have one shot.
Moving on.
Rebecca, did you find the remote?
So,
You don't need it.
in trying to be extra prepared, I uploaded the wrong presentation on Monday. So,
Shall we just go right to questions?
yeah, so, I had
This is,
created a substantial presentation in anticipation of possibly the public being here. And so I provided copies of that presentation to you as a printout. And, I'm happy to answer any questions. Obviously, I've been providing updates to you over the past 2 years, I think, on this plan. The action before you today is to adopt the plan. However, it won't go into effect, or won't be submitted to the Department of Water Resources until the time that the Groundwater Authority, which is the Joint Powers Authority, acts next month. So the plan is to submit that plan at the culmination of having every single individual groundwater sustainability agency adopt the plan, and then the Groundwater Authority will make their final approval, and then it can be packaged up and submitted to the state for their final approval. So,
Peter, have there been major changes since we got this the last time?
no, there were quite a few comments from the public that were addressed.
No, and that's why you were waiting for possible.
Right, so there've been quite a few fixes. Most of them were just not really substantial in nature. So there's an appendices that was created as a result of that effort to respond to public comments. And they were kind of categorized as either, just grammatical, various things, but nothing changed with regards to the planned objectives associated with the 6 sustainability indicators. Those still remain.
is it,
And then, so nothing has changed substantially since the plan was.
Russ, you're the one that's been the representative and
Yeah.
been part of this. If you're recommending this, anything you want to tell us, or are we good, or
Oh, yeah, this is
so it looks like?
pretty much a coffee grinder type of effort. They had to grind through all this stuff. But there was a mention about a modification that the county wanted to make, and I think that we were going to also make it that we're a portion of the East San Joaquin, but we wanted to add language that said that Calaveras County and CCWD would not be expected to enforce or to participate in enforcement of I don't know, punitive actions against people that are outside of our county boundary. Where is that language?
I am unfamiliar, so would you like something in the resolution specific to that, perhaps?
I thought it was, I don't know, I can't remember where exactly I saw that the suggestion that that was going to be something that the county was going to insist on. And I thought that they referenced that we were going to do the same thing, so.
I don't know that we would necessarily, I'm not familiar with that language, if they proposed specific language. I don't know that it would necessarily need to be in the plan, since the county lacks jurisdiction outside of its boundaries anyways.
Okay.
But I'm not aware of that language being introduced, if it was.
Is our future financial commitment explained in here?
No, that is still in the works, and actually.
Big question mark.
Well, I think that's, maybe we can throw the two together at that point, because I think that they're related. I mean, clearly, when it comes to the groundwater basin, the water that we're using is almost immeasurable compared to theirs. And so we want to be talking about that sort of commitment, not acres. We want to be talking about acre feet, extracted, and that's the financial commitment. And, and that also includes if the enforcement action. I mean, I don't know why, it would seem like the state will be the enforcement, but I love how, I know they kick the can down the road.
Yeah, and just to clarify on that, so the county and CCWD would only have the ability to take enforcement action through the vehicle of the GSA, of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which includes the County of Stanislaus and Rock Creek Water District as well. Any enforcement, if it was delegated back to the county, would only be within the jurisdiction of the county itself.
I actually see that being a more likely scenario where we would want enforcement in the other jurisdiction as opposed to enforcement in our own, because it's certainly more detrimental to the actions are.
And that determination about what enforcement, if there was any, would be made at that GSA level throughout.
But there were a couple of options about how they were going to divide up the pie, the expenses, ongoing expenses, and
so that actually is going on right now at this very moment. There's a meeting down in Stockton of the Groundwater Authority right now. Obviously, these meetings conflict.
Oh, right.
But Walter Ward of Stanislaus County is sitting on that board. And the proposal today is to come up with a 6-month carryover to the fiscal year for the efforts to continue beyond this. And so today they're taking up an item or they're not taking up an item, so it won't be finalized until next month, but there's a discussion item about how those costs are going to be allocated. And the long-term goal is to move away from these kind of fixed amounts for each GSA and move more towards a pumping-related allocation. Obviously.
So that's the positive thing, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
It is.
as far as expenses for us.
Yeah. As I mentioned, a lot of those costs are going to be offset by the Zone 2 fund in San Joaquin County for the other agencies. So it looks like we're paying a lot more than we actually are. It's just a matter of us having some of our costs associated with this effort not being offset by their assessments that they put on per every parcel in San Joaquin County. So the proposal right now is about, I think, $30,000 between the 4 agencies. So what we've been doing typically per our memorandum of understanding is an equivalent split between the 2 counties, and that's split down further. So right now, CCWD has been paying about 25% of that, and then the county's been picking up 25% historically for the development of the plan.
Well, I'd like to remind the board that early on, you had picked a number that you thought that our responsibility was going to possibly be up to $80,000, and so far we've got $12,000 in it. I mean, our membership fee in the original effort, plus I think that we've got hit for that one for the second year. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been just about $4,800 per year for the 2 years. A lot of that was offset by grants. We have to acknowledge that. So the Department of Water Resources did put 75% grant into the plan efforts. So the plan itself was offset by a lot of state funding. And then we did have an initial investment of a $5,000 amount, which was split between Stanislaus County, so $2,500. So you're right, to date it's been just a little under like $11,000 on behalf of the district.
Okay, so it's not a small amount of money, but it's not as large as you had anticipated, so.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I'd say the district's share will probably hover in between $10,000 and $20,000 for the next 3 to 5 years to continue this planning effort. It's cheaper, and a lot, so you have to understand, I guess maybe I should have presented more information on what that'll be, and I can bring this back to you next month when we provide another update.
Yeah, we'll have an update from what happened.
Yeah, but yeah, a lot of that is the administration of the plan. This is a 20-year plan that has quarterly reports, annual reports, updates. There's a model that needs to be refined. One of the things that I like to point out in this plan is that it's an adaptive plan. If you look through the plan, you realize the first 5 years is mainly focused on gathering data. There's not a whole lot being done in the first 5 years as far as implementation. What the plan did do was recognize that there are significant data gaps, specifically in the eastern portion of the basin. And so there are some efforts to put in more monitoring wells, start to refine data, and so that it will be definitely an adaptive process for the first 5 years as we look to see what the realities are as far as management of the basin and how much water they're short and how they're going to make that up over the 40, I guess 20
Have
to
we
40
voted on this?
No, yes, we are making a motion. And what I'd like to say is that for your next presentation, why don't we put Peter on the second meeting of the month so that he's able to attend that meeting, because there was a conflict.
Yeah, and I
Today?
think another point of discussion will be either updating or moving to a
Yeah.
new vehicle when it comes to the MOU within our GSA.
So why don't we plan to do that so that Peter can attend that?
Yeah, I think the second meeting in January would be the soonest that we would have that,
Right.
a really substantive update ready for the board, and it may even go into February.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
It's kind of interesting, the board should be aware that the plan has to be submitted and approved by the end of January, but then by April, you have to do an annual report on your plan.
Right. So you're submitting reports without your plan actually being
Approved.
adopted or approved. So it's very interesting, and I think they had proposed a legislative fix at one point regarding that. I don't know where that went, but it's interesting because DWR has 2 years to approve this plan. So we may not hear for 2 years as to whether or not final approval of the plan is, or if they're going to kick it back and say it's rejected. So 2 years from now, I'm not saying, I think we've checked all the boxes. Let's put it that way. Dave Cameron reviewed it, so he's very, understands what goes into a plan and whether or not we've checked all those boxes. And I think I can say we did that at least. So
That's not 100% guaranteed, by the way.
Do we
But we
have,
do feel
do we have
pretty good
any
about
other
it.
yes,
questions
he doesn't
from the
warranty
board?
that advice.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying.
I will add that SIGMA does require a hearing before it's adopted, so I don't know if you were going to tee that up, Peter, but
We have
simply
to have a public hearing?
opening a hearing.
Right here, right now?
Right here, right
Okay.
now, before you move to adopt
Okay,
the plan or approve the plan.
So you have to open the public
So-
hearing before the motion?
Correct. Yeah, let's open a public hearing before the motion.
Okay.
Motion to close the public hearing, then take action on the
Okay.
motion itself.
I'd like to open,
Public hearing?
public hearing on the Eastern San Joaquin Groundwater Subbasin Groundwater Sustainability Plan.
I would just ask for any more questions from the board and
Okay.
then from the public, and then I'll close it.
Any questions from the board or the public?
I just have a question. It's not agendized as a public hearing. Does that matter?
It was noticed properly, and so just has to be noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. As long as you record the hearing in the minutes, you're good. And it was
I'll
noticed
make a motion,
properly.
Hearing-
I'll make a motion, we close the public hearing.
Second.
Second, okay.
I think we have to vote on that.
Now, motion to adopt resolution number
Would be 83.
29.
Can we just for the sake of the procedures under Sigma, can you just do
We need to
a
vote on the motion to close the
closure?
public hearing.
Yep.
May I have a
All those
vote
in favor?
on closing the public hearing?
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes. Okay, now, I'm looking for a motion to adopt resolution number 29.
So moved.
Second. Go ahead.
Second.
How about Cindy?
Call the roll?
Director Thomas?
Yes?
Director Davidson?
Yep.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Underhill?
Yes.
President Underhill, if I might, since I'm on a theme of staff recognition today, Peter needs to be recognized for this work effort as well. He's taken on a huge role within the GSA over the last several years. This is also an extremely complicated process, and Peter has become a leader in the effort and just deserves a lot of credit for the work that he's put into this.
Way to
Thank
go,
you,
Peter.
Yes.
Good job.
I'm sure it was great.
That's okay, we're fine with that.
I could tell
We
it
had our copies, right?
was going to be stunning.
Okay, moving on.
Let's, can we
Oh,
take a
let's-
quick little
Why
break?
don't we take a 5-minute break?
Good deal.
Reconvene the meeting, please. Okay, under new business, 5E, approval of amendment of fiscal year 1920 personnel allocation. Rebecca.
Hi, so this item has been discussed for a little while, and so the formality is just coming forward to have the board adopt the adjustment to the position allocation list. On the second page of the staff report, I put the financial information due to this change here. There's no budget amendment required at this time because there's sufficient salary savings in the operations budget to absorb that. And then specifically, if you look at the position allocation on page 1 of 2 in that position allocation, you can see the total number of positions stays the same, where you see the 11 in parentheses in the far right. We're just changing from 12 to 9 and increasing the 1 to 4. So the total is the same. It's just the classification for the range is changing, okay? And if you have any specific questions with regards to, you know, what they're doing that's different or why this is coming beyond what's in the staff report, Damon can certainly speak to all of that.
Will their designation, these people that are being, they're doing the work as the senior folks, but will there be a change in their designation or their designated title?
Well, so the title will change from, I believe they're called senior treatment operators now to senior supervisor. And that reflects the fact that they actually are supervising staff.
Okay.
Yeah. And as a result, that equates to the personnel allocation change.
Okay.
Excuse me, and you had been, I think I remember that you had been looking at these positions before, and then you just,
Yeah, when I came on board, this had, from what I understand, had been a topic of conversation for quite some time, and then upon doing a deep dive into the nature of the work effort, it's the same work. Yeah.
We talked about this at the finance
right,
meeting.
right.
so
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
If you're ready for a motion and no questions, I'll make it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, if I could have a motion.
I'll make a motion to adopt the amendment to the fiscal year personnel allocation as presented.
Second.
Okay.
Is there any public comment?
Any public comment? I keep forgetting that, sorry. Okay, call the roll.
Director Thomas?
Yes.
Director Davidson?
Yes.
Director Cicada?
Yes.
President Bertha?
Moving ahead, item 5F, the Forest Service Wood Innovations Program funding opportunity. Oh, and that was Joel?
But I can cover for Joel on this one if he's, I'm not sure where he is, but, and it is, Joel and I were discussing it this morning. This really is a discussion item where we want to bring the board up to speed on some discussions we've been having, the staff's been having, and get some direction. So there is part of the motivation behind the discussion item now is there's what's called a Wood Innovation Grant that the Forest Service puts up every year in January. It's something I've looked at in the past, and so we're considering submitting an application for that grant. And the idea is really, I think, gets to forest management, forest health in our watersheds, which we know, study after study shows increases water yield and water quality, and hopefully helps the snowpack stay in place rather than melting earlier in the season. So these are all things that are directly in CCWD's and the county's interests. And one of the pieces that we've heard a lot about, a few of the board members were at the Mountain County's presentation a few weeks ago. It was a huge topic of discussion last week at Aqua, is the lack of industry that supports sustainable forest management practices. We used to have a timber industry that could do that, serve that function. We don't. And biomass power is one of the things that can support sustainable forest management practices. So that's really what is driving this. We met a couple of weeks ago. Not a couple of weeks ago, a couple of days ago, with Steve Lewinsky, and Regine Miller is the new executive director for CHIPS, and obviously CHIPS has been pursuing this for more than 10 years now, and they have, in their pursuit, they are very close to actually, seeing this project come to fruition. And I think they deserve a tremendous amount of credit for their perseverance. They're fully permitted. They've been through the environmental review. They have an interconnection agreement with PG&E. They have a PPA through Biomat at $200 a megawatt. The only thing that they, and I sympathize. I have sympathy for Steve because he's been through this incredible process. And they get to the point where they finally have a PPA where they can go out and get financing for the project, and the utility that's going to buy the power goes into bankruptcy. So the PG&E bankruptcy is really, I think, what's holding up that project at this point. But they're very close to realizing success for that project that's been in the works for a long time.
What's the likelihood that the bankruptcy judge is going to ask them to go out and spend more on power than they normally would to generate it?
So far, the bankruptcy court has not touched, and PG&E has not put the RPS contracts, the Renewable Portfolio Standard contracts, are not on the table in the bankruptcy. They could be, and we have, those contracts all have, as I'm sure Steve is aware of, those contracts all have provisions in them that they're subject to bankruptcy. But I think for political reasons, probably, PG&E has not proposed cutting those contracts, and those programs remain in place. So as soon as there's nothing actually stopping them from securing that contract right now, other than they can't, it's hard to attract financing when the buyer is in bankruptcy. But hopefully, once PG&E emerges from bankruptcy, whatever that looks like, they will then be able to secure financing because the biomat, the remat, those types of programs still exist. So that's really the discussion we've been having. Joel's done a bunch of research on this. He participated in a webinar on the grant program. And so we're still really trying to figure out internally if we have the bandwidth to pull this grant application together over the next month, and if that's really the best next step. We also want to continue discussions with CHIPS, and it maybe a partnership with them rather than us pursuing a separate project is a better alternative, or maybe a multi-agency approach would be a better alternative. So we want to look at all these different options, but to the extent I think that we can support creating an industry on this forest thinning and sustainable forest management practices. It's just, these projects are a win-win in a lot of different ways. They create good jobs. They have tremendous air quality benefits, and the forest health and watershed benefits. So they're really multi-level benefits, but they're very costly and they are very complicated. So it takes a lot of work, as I'm sure Mr. Walensky will testify. It takes a lot of work to get these to the finish line.
One of the things that I'm looking at is about possibility of a biomass facility, on Highway 4.
That's what this is for.
Right.
That's this
Okay.
item, yeah. So we would be, if we were to pursue the grant opportunity, we're building on work that Utica has done in the past. We got a grant to do a fuel study, which was a very, very high-level preliminary study, basically confirming what we all already know, is that there's plenty of fuel in the forest to supply these types of projects. But we also want to be very sensitive to, we don't want to compete with CHIPS. We want their project to be successful. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is complementary to what they're doing, and that we're learning from their experiences. So that's the idea for this funding opportunity, would be a feasibility analysis to look at all of the different factors, including the economic factors and then try to reach a determination as to whether the project's viable or not.
Michael, how big is the footprint for a biomass plant? I mean, acreage-wise, I guess.
Yeah, so
Something like that.
based on past research that I've done, for a 3-megawatt biomass plant, you're going to need a minimum of 5 acres and probably more than that.
Do you have any idea of where a biomass plant would be located on Highway 4?
Isn't there one in Buena Vista?
It closed.
No, but it's still there.
Still there.
If you want to go see one, go to the casino.
No, I don't want to see one.
It's for sale.
I'm just curious where they might
It's right
put it.
across the street from the casino.
It's for sale if you want it. There's also
Why isn't that-
the plant in Jamestown is a 17
Yard art for the
megawatt
casino.
plant. I believe the Jamestown plant, I think, is 17 megawatts. There's one in Sonora at SBI's facility there, which I want to say is 5 megawatts. When we did the fuel study a couple of years ago, we selected, just for the sake of that analysis, it wasn't really a plan to build on that site, but we looked at different properties that were owned by public agencies and that had the right zoning, and then we picked the City of Angels Camp wastewater spray field off of Whittle Road, right behind Glory Hole Sports. Good highway access, central location, lots of benefits, or lots of reasons why that would be an attractive site. We weren't going down the path of, hey, let's build a plant here necessarily. It was for the purposes of that study and determining the availability of fuel. So site selection this is all very preliminary stage. So site selection will be a big part if we were to do a feasibility analysis at this point. We do own property that would, it seems logical for this type of a project on a wastewater treatment plant for example, or, we can think of some other properties that we already own that would accommodate this kind of thing. But there's there's more due diligence that would have to be done to determine whether those sites are appropriate or not.
During one of the Highway 4 meetings that we've had, I think you were still at UWPA, and I want to say the discussions were, it was just so cost prohibitive to put one in.
Yeah.
What has changed to be looking at it again?
The biggest difference is the biomat program. So at the time, the price under the biomat, so biomat is the biomass feed-in tariff. Basically, it's what we've heard a lot about REMAT, which is the renewable market adjusting tariff for other renewable sources, hydropower, solar, lots of other renewable sources. Wind can utilize REMAT. Biomat is the REMAT equivalent for biomass facilities. At the time, the price in that mechanism was about $127 a megawatt. And to pencil, these projects won't operate at that price point. Since then, biomat has been retooled by the PUC, and the price right now, the power purchase agreement that CHIPS got just recently, and I think they're one of only 3 in the state that has one of the new biomat contracts, and they're at $200 a megawatt. Now the projects start to pencil.
You know, in my PG&E bill, I got a notice that says that customers can choose to purchase power via solar. Is PG&E getting into solar, and is this biomass still gonna pan out if they go into solar, or does anybody else get that memo?
No, but it's the same thing. I mean, the only reason that solar power pencils out is because it's heavily subsidized, and that's what they're finally doing with the biomass.
Right.
They're talking about subsidizing it. Solar
These
on its
projects
own doesn't work out.
These projects are not competitive without subsidies, because to extract the fuel from the forest, to deliver it to the biomass facility, the power generation process itself, all of that is way more expensive than hydro or solar or any other
Natural gas.
any
Let's
other
start at
power
the
generation
cheapest.
facility. That's right. So
The most abundant and the cheapest is natural gas. And
right. So
we're
the
bound
state
and determined
has
not to use any of it.
Yeah. So the state has to create mechanisms like biomat in order for these projects to be viable. And without those mechanisms, the projects won't. And that's why we're seeing plants shut down. That's why Chinese Station a couple of years ago, they were in the process. They had already noticed staff they were going to close because the agreement that they had based on a previous tariff was expiring. At the time, it was Governor Brown that stepped in and provided a 5-year extension to that RAM program. And their future is uncertain. That was a couple of years ago. They've got a couple of years left on that contract, and unless the state steps in and provides some incentive for these plants to continue to function, they will close, which is really, in my opinion, really short-sighted of the state to allow that to happen when we have so much, overgrown forest that needs to be managed in a sustainable way.
They just can't seem to get over the fact, because they think that they're pollution emitters, but catastrophic wildfire
Right.
is
much cleaner than burning
is
in
the
the
big one in
forest. That's right.
in the room.
And that's another thing that has changed recently, I would say, is the attitude towards these types of projects, especially even from the environmental community. In the past, these projects were very controversial, but even a lot of environmental, not all. So there are some that are going to oppose these things, any cutting of any tree ever, and we're not going to convince those folks. But there are a lot of environmental organizations now that have come around to say, you know what, this is a better alternative than the material burning in the forest. Having it burn in a way that is actually very clean.
Material and all the creatures.
Right. So it's.
Are you kind of looking like CCWD, perhaps building a biomass plant, and with the power generated, would you use it to power one of our treatment plants, or sell it, or is it not enough?
So
Just
we're
do it for management of the forest. What do you
we're
think?
looking at a lot of different options. That's one potential option. But typically in Calaveras County, projects to power our own facilities don't compete against CPPA. In other areas where they don't have that benefit, those projects might be more competitive. although not necessarily with biomass. With these projects, you really need to sell into, you need to sell the power wholesale to a buyer that has to buy at a premium, like biomass. So that's what we would probably be pursuing here. But again, very early discussion of whether we pursue that, whether we partner with other agencies or other organizations to pursue something along those lines. I think it's in our interest, though, and in our it's in the district's interest and the county's interest to see these projects move forward. So.
And they're having grant funds, so it's not like it's an out of pocket for us to.
Yeah, so if we were to
There's a
go for
match.
this grant, there would be some match component, but it would likely mostly be in kind. And so there would be some, work for the district that we would put into this. But Joel, you have more specifics on that?
Well, just looking at the slide, so there's an $8 million funding in total that's nationwide. and
Nationwide?
competitive. And
It's not a lot of money.
the grants are generally limited to $250,000 per project. However, if you do collaborate or make a really good pitch, they'll go higher than that. And the Forest Service definitely likes to see a lot of collaboration and lots of letters of support and lots of organizations working together. And so I think there could be an opportunity to get a lot of support for a study like this and get a lot of people coming together.
And there's a reason we wouldn't go through UMRA to do this?
There's not necessarily a reason we wouldn't, no. I think at this point, if we're gonna pursue this grant,
Could be fast.
yeah, we need to put the work in and put the grant together and seek letters of support from other agencies. But in terms of actually partnering on it at this point, I think what we get out of this.
Do we have to mention our future partners, or could we say that we're seeking a regional solution with others?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I would hate to submit this application and then have, Amador County get, say, well, we better do it ourselves,
No, and I
I'd
think
rather-
we would specifically highlight the work that UMRA has done that we've been a part of as, this is work that we are already involved in, this type of work. And so no, I think we would highlight all of those partnerships. We would seek support. But I think the way I would see this is the work product that comes out of this, if we get a feasibility analysis that says, yeah, there's a potential project here, then at that point we go to UMRA, we go to all of our local partners and say, hey, let's figure out the best way to make this happen. And maybe it's not CCWD doing it, maybe it's a regional.
I would say most likely it would be better if it was.
Maybe it's a regional partnership,
I got a couple of questions here. On the bottom sentence on page 2 of 3, it says succinctly here that the projects that receive grant funding generally must be completed within 2 or 3 years. That's the planning portion only.
The feasibility analysis, that's
Correct.
right.
All right. And you're going on that you talk about under financial considerations that we might spend between 100 or 150,000 to do this. You're not proposing that we'd need 250?
No, that's a very, very high-level preliminary estimate, and we would come back with a very specific cost, and nothing would move forward without board approval in terms of fund commitment. This is more of a discussion to find out whether this is where staff effort should be placed, and does it line up with our mission statement? Is it a little outside of other things that we've done other than the UMRA work and our partnership with fire safe councils and the conservation crews in order to do thinning? But when Michael and I talk this through, we really do feel like it makes a lot of sense, which is why we're so supportive of the UMRA efforts, to at least facilitate a study and some agreements and some legwork that could be used, not by us maybe by someone else. But one thing, and I think you maybe already mentioned this, is we need to be and we want to be very careful about the efforts that have already been put in by CHIPS and,
Right.
the Wilsonville plan. And that's why we met with Steve Walensky and Regine, was it yesterday? 2 days ago? And I think that they were cautiously supportive of this. They don't want to see us take anything away from them, but I think they would like to see us be more involved in supporting their efforts and helping them be successful. And then in turn, they seemed very interested in trying to get us ahead of where we otherwise would be and try to steer us around pitfalls with the development of another facility. But I know Steve felt strongly that if we could just get that Wilseyville one going and show that it's successful, then that would maybe lead to more interest in the area and help us maybe get this one going. And so I was very encouraged by those conversations, and I think there's more exploring to be done.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to have more follow-up with them. I look at the possibility of having a couple of these plants operating in Calaveras County, the economic activity that generates, but also just so that all of the forest management work that's being done isn't just grant-funded work, which is what it is right now, is through UMRA and through CAL FIRE, through other grant sources, we bring in money to do grant-funded work, but we don't have a sustainable economic industry that is perpetuating that work. We're just going out to get more grants to try to do the next project. But if we have a couple of projects like this that are operating, they're gonna perpetuate that work, through the economic development that generates. And that, I think, is really the goal that we would work towards.
How much conversation do you have with economic development, for example?
None yet, but that would, absolutely, we'd bring
That's a
the
vital
county.
component.
We would bring the county in on it, for sure.
I can tell you that Steve's number one goal is to try to find a way that could sustainably replace at least a portion of the timber industry that was lost in his community of West Point and Wilseyville. And some exciting things are, what can you add on to a biomass facility, and what can you co-site? And so you can do things like, they generate a lot of heat to make this power, so you can do things like you could dry sludge from a sewer plant in a large building, and then you can also use that sludge to put it into pellets and add some of the ash that the biomass plant produces, and you can make some fertilizer that can't be used in all areas, but can be used for lawns and gardens and things of that nature. And there are other examples of that being very successful in having these auxiliary products. So it's not just a one-trick pony. And Steve has, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 10 other ideas, some of which he kind of was keeping close to the vest because he wants to try to get an advantage on them. But it seems to me like you could have a really, really neat economic development site, which could be long-term jobs for a community that's extremely distressed right now and can't find those things. And so if we could be part of that, benefit from someone else running it, maybe they could take our sludge, a portion or all of that would be huge. Right now we're spending a lot of money to truck it very far away. And then if we could see that economic development and see some power sold, and then make sure it's not just gonna flame out after 5 or 10 years, you need to get those long-term contracts.
That's the big key.
On the economic side, isn't there other grants for developing, encouraging economic growth, and for an area, Wilseyville, West Point, or whatever? And then this would be a good topic to have at the town hall meeting along with everything else. in that area.
Agreed. Let's be clear, this is, there has to be the money to operate these facilities, and we live in a state, while it may make us feel good, the reality is, this is gonna be a multi-million-dollar investment, and how long is the contract that they have now?
20 years.
20 years?
So, that's the challenge with these projects is, with most power generation projects, you get a 20-year PPA and you can demonstrate a quick payback on the investment, you're good. But with these, it's not just the PPA, it's the fuel procurement. And those don't come in long-term contracts. And that's one of the challenges that CHIPS is having right now. You have a 20-year PPA, but you can't get a contract for, a commitment to provide fuel at a specific price for more than a few years.
Well,
That's just not how the timber industry
There's no money in the
works.
Forest Service to cut any of this timber either. The feds haven't shown any interest in actually cutting it, and, there's a lot of, I'm just saying, I love the concept, and I think I'm very, very strong and have been on forest management. I think we should do what we can, but let's be realistic about the chances of this. I think it's very slim, but certainly I think something we should try to do, but I don't think we should get everybody all excited and, I think.
No, there's a lot of challenges, and
I think it's gonna be it'll be an informational, we know that we've got an abundance of excess timber in the forest. Trees snapping off all the time. It's a mess up there. So, it would be great that if nothing else out of this, that we were able to establish how much of the forest annually we could remove. And I think it'll be an astounding figure. I would love to come up with that number.
Yeah.
And then also, it'd be nice to know, how much carbon is emitted in catastrophic wildfire, and do a comparison like that. I mean, those are the things that I've always wanted to,
Here
to get-
you go.
Some of the
This was what the
benefits.
study found for how much we could actually remove. This is not fully up to date, but
This was 2016.
Right, but this was for a 3 megawatt biomass plant, was what the field study was. But we're scratching the surface with a 3 megawatt plant. Unfortunately,
What's
that's
that, BTD?
bone dry tons is the chips, basically.
All right.
The forest could support a larger project. Biomat is capped at 3 megawatts. And above 3 megawatts right now, there is no procurement mechanism that would provide enough revenue. So that's really, unfortunately, that's what the max that we could do. But I think to your point, I agree, there is reason to be skeptical. It's why, we've looked at this for a few years now and it hasn't moved forward because there's a lot of challenges. There's good reason to be skeptical and there's a good reason to pursue this cautiously. I will say though, to me, it seems like with recent events, Mountain County's last week in Aqua, this is on the top of the agenda in a way that it hasn't been before. Forest management, especially with the PSPS events. I think there's opportunity right now to start to push these types of projects forward, identify the regulatory hurdles or the reasons why they weren't successful in the past, and start to move past those hurdles and move these projects forward. I think we have an opportunity here.
And
At
we
the-
want to bring in whatever partners we can, because you're talking about chips, although we would,
Absolutely.
be in a different location.
There's, I think I feel pretty comfortable saying there is no way a project like this could move forward without a regional approach with regional partners working on it together. This is not something that we would do independent.
Everybody wants one of these next door.
Right.
Michael, at the Region 3 meeting down in San Diego, there was somebody in the back of the room that was talking about that they're either planning or they are well underway of building a plant. But I got the impression that they were scaling it to be capable of doing more than three to 5 or something. They're going to throttle it back. But what's the rationale for that? If it's capped at 3?
It all comes down to the economics, and that's what this feasibility study would take a very careful look at. Because ideally, you are scaling it larger to generate more, but it's at what point, if the price is so much better at 3 megawatts, how high would you have to scale it, and how much more is that going to cost you before before it actually becomes an economic benefit? I think that was Placer County Water Agency. Really, we are not out on a limb on this. All of the Mountain County water agencies are looking at these types of projects. Some of them have pursued them in the past and been frustrated by the barriers or by the lack of a return on the investment. And are now revisiting these things. This is, I think we have an opportunity, and I think I'm going to, use my time on the Region 3 board to advocate for policies that incentivize these projects.
There was a photograph that was flashed on the screen at a recent Mountain Counties meeting that showed quite an attractive house on a ridge top surrounded by 1,000 acres of dead trees. I mean, just bone dead trees.
Mm-hmm.
And that photograph, I mean, that certainly was a bone-chilling thing for me to see that thing. And that should be put on a split screen with a fire racing up that similar ridge, and it doesn't take a very smart person to figure out that we got to do something about that. And this to me, this is the only reasonable solution, albeit probably expensive. But what are the alternatives? It's pretty clear.
Well, even the comparison of trucking, if you are gonna manage the forest, if you are gonna cut the wood out, look at the emissions of driving it down to the valley or driving it to the nearest. If you do that comparison also, You know, I mean, when it just frustrates me how people can be short-sighted about, you know, about air pollution and carbon and stuff.
I agree, and I
not-
think
not
that's why,
recognize-
though, a lot of the environmental organizations that really pay attention to science are coming around on these types of projects and see the benefits and the trade-offs of not doing it. The trade-offs are pretty damaging.
I'll bet it's been 12 years since we had Senator Feinstein's staff up here and did a summit here, and none of those environmental groups were on board at that time. They were just starting to come around.
Right.
But I'll bet it was 12 years ago.
Yeah,
You know.
and that's why I say, I think that's, in addition to the changing price within biomat, I think that dynamic has shifted already a little bit and hopefully continues to shift, and I think that creates an opportunity for us.
A couple of the big ones, the Center for Biological Diversity is currently suing every new plant that's trying to come online, and then the Sierra Club has historically been opposed. But Steve Walensky shared a story with us that the Sierra Club had indicated they were going to sue the Wilseyville plant, and Steve knew some of the top people in the Sierra Club, and he asked to meet with them and then give them a tour of their plant and show the entire program that they're designing. And he was able to avert that lawsuit by the Sierra Club because they actually showed and proved scientifically that it actually did make sense.
Right.
So it's those kind of efforts and that kind of success that I think may start to change some of the opinions on these environmental groups that are trying to stop all
Right.
of these.
So CHIPS made it through the environmental review process with no litigation on this
That's
project.
great. What do you guys need from us on this? It seems like
Okay,
we've.
this was
This is
just
an
informational.
informational item. We wanted to bring you up to speed on the work that we've been doing. We haven't yet made a decision internally as to whether we're gonna make a run at this grant or not, but that's one of the things we're considering, but we're also just looking at making sure that we're reaching out to partners and moving this discussion forward one way or another, whether it's that grant or some other.
Okay, and this is gonna be shared between you with Joel and yourself as far as the grant
Joel wouldn't keep
application or the
anything from me.
investigation?
Well,
Yeah, we're working together on, you know, because one of our concerns is, you know, we're moving we have a lot of moving parts. Staff's really, really taking on a lot. And so, as attractive as this grant might be, we have to really make sure we have the bandwidth for it.
Yeah.
So that's one of the factors here.
Yeah, looking at the list of who you'll be working with or asking for letters of support, yeah, that's gonna take you quite a bit.
Right.
with the window closing on the opportunity on
Yeah.
January 15th.
January
You
15th.
have to make a decision today, don't you?
It'll have to be quick. One nice thing is this is an annual program, so we could go after it right now, or we could take a little bit more time and make a run at it next year. But I think that we mainly just wanted to get some feedback from the board on whether this is something that you feel is worthwhile.
How long is it an annual program?
Good question. I'm not sure. I know.
And do we even have, we don't even have a federal budget, do we?
No, we don't. But they have not, they've not put a hold on this, so, but whether it's
So
guaranteed
this
to
must have
be.
been funded at $8 million last year.
Yes,
So they
that's exactly
refunded
where it
$8
is right
this
now.
year.
So whether it will come back around next year, I don't know that we have any guarantee on that. It has been, for several years now, it's an annual process, but, that's a good question.
Well, we know who to ask.
We do.
Yeah.
Okay, then, we're fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I certainly think it's something we should be pursuing. I mean, even if it was not in our county or not local, I mean, we definitely should be pursuing the expansion of the biomass in California. If we're serious about forest management, we need to be.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're good.
Thank you.
Okay. 6A, Michael, update on the slurry line.
All right. I don't have slides for you, so, but you've all heard about the slurry line before, and I'm really glad Steve Sarantopoulos, the Utica GM, is here as well, because obviously we have to be partners in order to make this work. So just a real quick background overview, although I'm sure you've all heard about it before. The slurry line is it was constructed by Calaveras Cement to transport limestone slurry from their quarry off of Camp 9 Road to the cement plant down here in San Andreas, and was only in operation for about 10 years before they ceased operation, but it's been very well preserved and it's been talked about as a potential raw water supply line probably since the early 80s, since it's shut down as a limestone slurry line. Peter and the board did a lot of work over the last several years to acquire the easements and the property rights, and so the slurry line is ours. And so we're pushing that forward to develop, the next steps of converting it into a water distribution line. Right now, we have, incidentally, I thought it was almost comical to note that the 17.4 mile high pressure slurry line was built for $1.4 million. Couldn't even do the environmental review on it for that.
There probably was no environment.
Right. So you would think it'd be simple to, we have a water line and we know that there's demand for that water out there. Seems like an easy challenge, but unfortunately it's not. We have a lot of moving parts right now, kind of a multi-pronged effort. One piece of it is the engineering and construction of converting the slurry line to a water distribution line. It was installed, all 17 miles of it doesn't have a single valve, PRV, ARV, turnout, nothing. There was nothing on it. It was just a transmission line for slurry. So we've been evaluating the best way, where do we add valves? Where do we add PRVs and ARVs to manage that pressure? By the time it reaches San Andreas, it's a very high pressure line. So we want to make sure that it's safe, that the pressures that we're delivering to prospective customers are safe, and that we have the valves in place where we need them so that we have the ability to isolate the line. So that's one part of the effort. We have already installed a couple of valves and one PRV and a couple of ARVs, just to make sure that even as we're testing it, that we're doing it safely. And a pressure gauge at one point along the line. And so we have conducted some tests already and found no leaks so far, and that the line is in very good condition, which is good news. We still have a ways to go. We're moving our way down the line, and we're going to continue that testing. So that's the infrastructure piece of it. We're also in the very near future here, hopefully by the end of the week, we'll see if we can get all the addresses together, but conducting a demand analysis and some community outreach. And the goal here is to determine what the demand for water along the slurry line is. So we're reaching out with a survey to each of the property owners along the slurry line, trying to gather as much information from them as they can. Not just, there have been some surveys in the past with a very generic sort of, do you want water, yes or no? And we're trying to get much more detailed information with this survey of how much water, when do you want the water, make sure that the people responding are aware of really critical information that might change their response, such as, we're going to be delivering pressurized raw water, but that they're responsible for installing their irrigation system from that point on. We have very limited capacity, so they may be in their interest, if they're going to develop based on this, that they have some storage on their side of the meter. There will be, I anticipate significantly more demand than we have the capacity to supply. And so in response to that survey, developing a delivery schedule, determining, how do we determine which customers get how much is going to be very challenging. But the data that we need to work with is what we're trying to gather from this survey. We anticipate, we're trying to make the letter and the survey questions as straightforward as possible, but we anticipate a lot of questions. So we're planning on a meeting, inviting those people to a meeting to have a discussion about the project and answer questions. And we're gonna, I think the plan is to invite President Underhill and Director Ratterman, whose districts the line passes through, and bring the people who might have questions together, and then gather responses from all the property owners.
How many properties are we talking about?
Is Peter here?
How much acreage are we talking about? Not,
Yeah, good
Yeah.
question.
You know, so there actually has been some investigation some time ago back in the 90s. And at the time, similar outreach was done, but long before we actually ever acquired the property rights in the slurry line. And yeah, there was an opportunity there. People were looking, in some cases, for 500 acre feet of water each. And there's just no way to do that without some additional, engineering and other things, perhaps even enlarging the pipeline. But at least there's an opportunity here to re-engage those folks. Obviously, property ownership's changed a lot since then, and
But we're talking about several dozen properties.
Yeah,
And
so-
probably several hundred, if not, more than 1,000 acres. I'm sure probably a little
well,
more than that.
that just brings to my question, because there's a known usage for, this most
Sure.
likely would be used in grapes or nuts, or most likely grapes. So there's certainly an area that we could, safely establish based on a standard, absorption rate for grapes, figure out how many acres we can actually sustain out there. And then I start to think too, just about the opportunity, if the improvements that we have to make are significant, and we're not gonna get paid back in a timely manner on ag, perhaps they establish an assessment district out of that.
Yeah, it could be, and I think it would probably be in our interest to do both, a landowner survey, and let's just look at the acreage and what it might be suitable for, and what the demand for water to serve that acreage would be.
Because Utica, they have a bigger demand than they have water supply, only because they don't want to use it on agricultural land. They could use more water on ag land at Utica, but then they'd give up their power generation.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion that is my next point here, but yeah, there is more ag demand currently than is being served. We know that with certainty.
Yeah.
And there is, especially on the CCWD side, there is surface water available to meet that demand. And
Well, even back when I was on the Utica board, I always thought that the value added of those wineries and not just grapes or wine, but just the value added crops and the tourism and all that stuff was worth way more than what they were generating out of that facility.
it's certainly, the challenge is yes, the benefit to the community, and this, we'll get back to the economic development conversation, could be tremendous.
And they also, I can recall that they never had a sustainable demand. Their demand, I don't know, maybe it changed, but it was never guaranteed, or it was only guaranteed for a few. But people were you were on a list, and you may or may not get water that year.
Those are curtailable contracts, that's
Yeah.
right. But there's very few circumstances where those are, where ag deliveries aren't actually met,
It only takes 1 year.
right? But even in the depths of the drought, when I was there, we asked for conservation, the consumers conserved, and there was no one that needed more water that didn't get it.
Oh, that's good.
So so that's sort of the community outreach piece of it that is underway right now. We hope to schedule that meeting probably mid-January is kind of the time frame that we're looking at. And then the other piece of it that was a good segue into the partnership that we would have to have with Utica. So we're talking about at a minimum a wheeling agreement, because the water has to come through the Utica ditch to get to the slurry line. But I think it's, and Steve and I have had some conversations about this. We have a meeting set up next week. It's also in our interest to take a look at a more comprehensive water supply agreement that we've talked about for years. So whether those are two separate agreements or we incorporate it all into one, looking at how to meet that unmet demand on the Highway 4 corridor with a raw water supply. Really, this is one piece of it, but it's a much bigger discussion, and so we want to make sure we're taking a comprehensive look at it. And then last piece that's also simultaneously underway is we're going to have to establish a connection fee and a water rate for these customers, because our current retail rate wouldn't apply. We have a treated water connection fee and retail rate.
I read that last part. We do have an ag rate, but
Right.
can we make it different than the one we have down below
No,
Calaveras?
so we really need to establish a different rate that's just for slurry line customers, because the ag rate that we have right now doesn't include any conveyance. It's just for delivery out of the Calaveras.
Well, we'd have to see what the wielding agreement,
So we need to,
what that's gonna.
and the infrastructure improvements that we're doing to the slurry line, we have to recover all these costs. And so we have to make sure that we aren't subsidizing this project with other sources of funding, or that if we are, that we're very, deliberate about that with unrestricted funds. But mostly, typically the way we want type projects to work is that the users of that water are going to cover the cost of the infrastructure and cover the cost of the water delivery. So that's what we want to try to capture.
If we establish a different raw water rate and have to do a Prop 218, it would not include the domestic water rate?
So there's a couple of questions there. One is, do we have to do a Prop 218? And now is when Dave and I are going to start arm wrestling. So we have a difference of opinion about that.
Well, the reason I ask it is because if we had it, one of our obstacles has been we've had so few ag rate customers.
Right.
They've always voted against raising it.
Right. So we will, if we have to go through the Prop 218 process, absolutely, we will do that, and I will defer to our legal counsel on that point in the end. The question, though, is whether we can do a Prop 218 hearing just for that rate. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if we needed to, we wouldn't have to reopen all of our rates just for that.
Yeah, right, that's accurate. The current ag rate is based off of assumptions and operations related to delivery from the Calaveras River to those parcels. This would be a separate conveyance system.
right.
It's a completely different set of costs that you're looking at that you'd be tying the rate to, so you have proportional benefit to those ratepayers that receive that water in the future.
Michael, I'm just kind of curious, what size is the easement for the pipe? 10 feet on each side, or?
Good question. I don't recall off the top of my
And
head.
then my other question with that is there a requirement, I know we have to maintain it, but is that something that we need to be looking at as we're surveying and upgrading the pipeline?
Maintain,
The easement.
The easement,
Pipe's
gotcha.
going here, so that's.
yeah, so access is a challenge in some areas. There's a big stretch of it between sort of French Gulch Road and Dogtown Road where there's not much access back there at all. So those are gonna be some challenges. We have easements, we have access and construction easements, or operation and maintenance easements for those areas. But that doesn't mean that we've ever been out there necessarily, so.
With this property being, fairly old, the easement's old, I'm wondering what size they are.
Yeah, so they're not consistent, and so just so you know too, all those easements were negotiated at the time the pipe was constructed by the cement company. So in some cases, they're as small as 10 feet, but they're as wide as 20 feet in some cases too, in other areas.
So 10 feet, so the pipe would be in the middle, 5 feet on each side?
Exactly.
We hope, yeah.
You never know.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
And so I did want to note that some of the contracts are different in certain instances between different landowners because of what they want at the time, so they're not consistent all the way through, but the language is pretty consistent most of the time in that it mentions not necessarily just the easement, but access and enjoyment of that easement. So there's an opportunity there for the district if they wanted to assert that easement right, that they could traverse property to get to that easement, but
How many easements are there, do you know of?
I think it's 31. You'd asked how many properties, and so I think in total there was 31 easements that were obtained, and those include there's two pieces of equipment, not equipment, or two pieces of infrastructure here. There's a water line that is connected to the Utica ditch, or Utica water systems, a turnout, and then that meets in a box, and there's some set of valves and things like that, and then it used to go one direction, it can go up to the where the quarry used to be, and then return back. So the idea was that they could send water up to the quarry, and then they would enter in some mixing areas, and then the slurry would come back down. But you also have the alternative too, is where that box, so that they join each other, you can just send water directly down the slurry line at that point and bypass the old quarry. So there's a lot of pipeline there beyond just the cement slurry line. And I know I've had some maps that I presented to the board
Yeah, I
in
was
the
going
past,
to ask you,
but-
when was the last time we had maps on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could easily send
Yeah.
those out to you again, just so you have a general idea of the vicinity and the properties that are involved. But, there's landowner outreach is probably good, and as you mentioned, maybe I think Charles would actually suggest we add a question to the survey we're looking to put out, asking people if they're willing to work with the district for access to that pipeline too. So.
Well,
The other piece I should mention is so there was an environmental impact report done a long time ago. So Dave's also in the process of reviewing that and making sure that whatever it is that we are doing is already either already been evaluated or we have proper environmental review in place. So I hope I wanted to give the board an update on all these different activities. I completely agree with Director Davidson that how frustrating it is to be, to know that there's this unmet demand out there, and to know that we have the water rights to supply that demand, and we haven't been able to figure out how to get that water to the people that are going to utilize it. So that's really what the effort is all about, and I hope, though, that we've also conveyed that it's unfortunately not as simple as we would hope. It's actually a fairly complicated endeavor, and so we're trying to move all of those pieces forward at the same time and as quickly as we can. But there's a lot that goes into it.
And that's why it's been talked about for years and nothing's been done. Director Thomas?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, Michael. Number one, what currently does UWPA charge per acre foot for their ag users?
So above, the rates depend on whether you're above the Murphy's Powerhouse or between Murphy's and Angels. Above Murphy's Powerhouse, I want to say it's 55, roughly. About around $55 an acre foot. Between Murphy's and Angels, it's probably around 25.
Isn't it dependent on the price of power that's
That's based
generated?
on lost generation, right? So the goal here would be that we're not asking to, and there's different ways to do it. If you purchase water from Utica, then the rate tends to be based on lost generation. But if we're adding CCWD water to the system and using that water to deliver, then it's not necessarily a lost generation rate. It's more of just what's the wheeling cost, what's our contribution to the maintenance of the system. So there's different ways that we can approach it, and it may be both of those options. And coming up with a fair rate for either of those options is the work that we have to do.
Do you know what the cost is for UPV? Water?
What is it? I want to say they're in the. I don't want to guess, so we can find out for you.
Okay, another couple of questions. You mentioned PRVs and ARVs. This is a pipeline that goes, with a constant slope. I'm not aware that it was
No, it's
Peter,
got
maybe you
some
can.
undulations.
Is there, well, were there pumping stations? You said there were no
No
valves or
pumping station. Well, originally there was a pumping station at the quarry, but we're not using that part of the system. We're only using the part that comes, it's gravity fed from the Utica ditch to a vault where it intersected with the slurry line. And previously it would go out to the quarry from there and then back, and there was a pumping station at the quarry. But the portion of the system that we're gonna utilize is just the intake and then from that vault downhill to San Andreas. But there are definitely undulations even between the Utica ditch and that vault. It goes down into Skunk Ranch Road in that area. It drops down into the road and then comes back up. And then from there down to Highway 4, across 6 Mile, and then back up over that ridge behind Ironstone, drops down again, and then up and over the ridge behind Ross Reservoir. And then I think from there, it's pretty much a straight shot downhill, but there's definitely some undulation in there.
Well, just so that the board has a more clear idea about this, the pathway and the topography, can we add some topo lines on this map that's going to be created?
Absolutely. In fact, we can even do better than that. Sam has generated a very cool map. I don't know if map's the right word, but it shows the gradients and the projected pressures along the way, the elevations that.
Well, what I'm trying to visualize in my head, and maybe others have thought about this too, but naturally I've heard pressures of 900 psi in certain places, but that's assuming that you've got.
That's at the vault down here.
Yeah, but you've got all this head pressure coming down. I'm visualizing a potential for loss of that head pressure so that we might need some of the ARV mechanisms to generate pressure.
Yeah,
So.
with a line like this and with those kinds of pressures, as soon as you start introducing valves, you need to have the ARVs and the PRVs to protect the lines. We don't want to create a vacuum and crush that line, very quickly.
Okay.
But that type of pressure is what we're trying to get under control. 900 psi is way too much for any portion of a distribution line.
Okay.
Although I can tell you, when Frank heard 900 psi down here, he wanted to put a generator at the bottom of the slurry line.
Or hydraulic mine.
Yeah, those big monitors.
But our goal would be to provide some consistent pressure that's within a safe operating range, but that also, the part of the value of the slurry line is that you're delivering pressurized water.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the challenges with the Utica system is with the exception of one customer, it's all it's flood irrigation. There's no pressure behind that water. So to deliver pressurized water from the slurry line is a huge benefit to the customer.
Yeah.
So we don't want to eliminate the pressures. We want to make sure we're covering, we're safely operating it, and that we're trying to deliver a safe but consistent range.
Okay. Does CCWD currently own the equipment that would allow them to hot tap that line?
I believe so, but I'll defer to Dave.
We have equipment that can hot tap smaller lines, however, 7 3/4 inch. We don't have the device that can hot tap that, but, we have experience with hot taps, 6 inch and smaller.
Yeah, I would think that before you have the town hall meeting or get the potential customers together, that you should have the answer to that question about who's going to be, what the cost would be for hot tapping and putting a valve in. If I was a property owner, I'd certainly want to know that.
Well, we would be, with the part of the goal of, adding valves, isolation valves along the way, is that we wouldn't necessarily always have to hot tap. We'd be able to isolate and isolate segments of the line. But
Well, what I'm visualizing is the Rolleri system up there where they've got these rainbird sprinklers out there and they are doing, like you say, pressure irrigation. But wouldn't each property owner, if they've got a large holding, that they wouldn't necessarily want to have only one hot tap on their property? If it's a 1/4 mile long, they'd want to have multiple hot taps like Rolleri does.
So the goal is, so this is one of the challenges, Dave and I were just talking about this. one of the challenges in collecting data is, it's one of those things where it's never the perfect time, because if we do all that work first, there's some guesswork that we would have to make. And then in the survey, we're also asking them to provide us with that information without knowing the cost yet, which is not necessarily ideal. It's not necessarily fair to the landowner to say, hey, how much water do you want? By the way, we don't know how much it's going to cost you. So what we've asked them to do is just assume that there's going to be a reasonable connection fee and a reasonable water rate for the water, and under those circumstances, how much water would you be interested in purchasing, and then all the other data that we're trying to collect. But we don't have the answers to all of those questions yet.
So you can't give them a range?
No, at this point, I would be very reluctant to put any numbers out there.
A blank check?
That's an important question to be answered 10 years from now when this thing happens.
What a pessimistic guy.
We don't need to engineer it right now, I don't think.
Can we vote again on this, Vice President? Thanks.
Yeah.
And how soon will you have this letter out?
We're just working, we're finalizing the draft of the letter right now. We had a few, we're still trying to make sure we have all the right addresses updated for each of the landowners. I would hope that we could get it out this week, but we'll see.
Okay, so, because I didn't see any reference to any time in this, any time period?
No, you didn't.
No.
There's
10 years, is that what you said, John?
No, the goal is, my goal has been over the last, since I started and even before that, was to, in a perfect world, we start identifying customers and we're able to deliver water in the next irrigation season. That's an extremely ambitious goal. So I don't know that we're going to get there.
Yeah.
But we do have people along the line that have said, as soon as you can give us a turnout, we'll put it to use right away. Mm-hmm. So it's up to us to work through all of these different hurdles, and then we know that we have prospective customers on the other side that are ready to put the water to use. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine getting through all of these different things in time for this summer or next summer, but we're gonna move it forward as quickly as we can.
Well, you'll bring the status and let us know.
Oh, of course.
Okay, well, so far I've gotten a no response to all my questions about what because of the information here.
All right, we're on a roll.
Certainly there is a number that you can give me and give the board is, there's no head pressure, so just gravity flowing into a pipeline that has a 7-inch inside diameter approximately.
Yes.
What is the gallons per minute that can be introduced into that pipe with no head pressure or no pumping? Just you have a wheelbarrow size opening that funnels down to a 7-inch.
No, we have that data, although we are in the process of verifying it because it's based on some very old studies. So Charles is working on making sure that information is accurate, and he's also said, we can do the math on it, but we're going to want to go out and test once we have some appurtenances in place that would allow us to conduct those tests. What are we actually able to get out there? But yeah, I don't have the numbers for you right in front of me, but yes, we do have that information.
There'd be a certain amount of internal friction and restriction, I would think. Just,
Do you have that answer?
yeah,
We
do you
do
have
have
that
that
answer?
Internal friction?
Yes.
Well,
Now,
so I'm getting
that's
another no answer.
Yes, no, we do have that answer. It is X plus Y.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then,
Yeah.
What is it you do in your spare time, Director Thomas? Gee.
Good Lord, now I'm gonna buy you a book for Christmas or something.
These are all important. But what good does it do to go talk to 31 property owners if
We
we
only
can
got
only
4 more hours of this meeting.
we can only give them 5 gallons a day of
Okay.
water. But let's
All right.
not forget we have 24 hours in a day, right? So,
Okay.
okay.
That's
So-
right. So we set up a delivery schedule. We meet as much of that demand as we can, and maybe we talk about an assessment district or something else going forward to increase the capacity of that line.
So you'll be bringing that back?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With
All
more
right.
answers.
So, guess whose turn it is?
I'd like to approve your report.
Would we,
He's got, it's redlined.
I don't want to
He'll
put
give it
Steve
back
on the
to you.
spot, but just in case there's any public that wants to comment on that, would we be able to do that very quickly?
Well, okay. Any public comment?
You don't have to if you don't want to. I just wanted to make sure you had the option. but-
And I think we'll maybe have some comments further down this.
Got it. Perfect.
Let's get together on it.
Yeah, you meet with Director Thomas.
There are answers to those questions.
Oh.
Yeah, they're not.
Maybe they'll answer them for you, but they're not answering them for me.
Okay.
Good morning, President Underhill, directors. I will be quick. I just want to highlight a few things in that came through the November operations work efforts. One is that collectively, we fixed 90 gallons per minute worth of service line leaks through the month of November. That was 33 repairs. And here's some, staff has been really good about documenting their work through photographs. This is in the Rancho Calaveras service area. So this is a 2-inch valve replacement. So the picture on the left is the old valve. Picture on the right is the installation of the new valve. So oftentimes what happens on this service, or this 2-inch water main installs, which are usually in cul-de-sacs, is we find a leak on what's called bluebell pipe on the 2-inch, and then we go to operate the 2-inch valve and it breaks. And so oftentimes we have to replace the valve while we're completing a repair on the water main or the service line. This is really typical of what folks experience or encounter when they are called out to a water line break. Oftentimes it digs its own hole and it shoots out into the air, and it's really easy to find. And then the challenge is how to accurately isolate it without taking a bunch of people offline. Here's some more work associated with the 2-inch line repair in Rancho. A lot of the focus through November, it being a short month due to the holiday, we're on these 2-inch water mains in that service area. Here's another one. And this is one that's really kind of representative of a few different service areas that we have. We have conduit, gas, and a water service line snaking through the middle of all that. And so
Is that power too?
yeah, so the deflection coming off of and so this is Common Trench, and we have talked about the fact that we have Common Trench in Poker Flat, in Copperopolis, as well as Big Trees Village, and I actually have reached out to our PG&E rep. We've been having a back and forth conversation about how, I've been pushing on PG&E how they have a responsibility to CCWD to put a project out to bid so that they can replace their underground power utilities in those service areas. Because as you can imagine, these repairs are quite challenging. Here's some work that was completed at the La Contenta wastewater treatment facilities. We have a sludge lagoon there, and you can see the picture on the left. It has been quite full for many years of dried sludge, and operations staff used their small Kubota tractor that we keep out at Southworth to remove all the sludge and put it out to our belt press before ultimate sludge disposal, where it's trucked to Sassoon. So I know there's recent conversation earlier in the board meeting about how far we have to drive to remove sludge. Well, we're driving to the bay. So this was a great work effort. It's reopened the lagoon for disposal and drying of sludge, and we're actually working now to install a septage receiving site, so where we can pump the septage from the different septic tanks through the area that we're responsible for, and not disrupt the overall operation of the wastewater facility by just dumping them into the process. We can actually receive the septage, dry it, and then remove it. So this will be a good benefit to the service area. This was wholesale service line replacements that took place in Poker Flat on Foothill Road. We had an area where customers were experiencing multiple leaks, and what we found was multiple leaks on 3 different service lines, and we just simply replaced them all. And this is one of the service line replacements where we've actually gone away from using the tough tube or the polypropylene flexible service line, and we used rolled copper. So this will provide us with a little bit of a litmus test as to how robust this is over the next few years compared to the polypropylene. Let's see, what else do we have here? Wanted to just kind of show you, to piggyback on the conversation about biomass, is this is our regulating reservoir in West Point, and we are working, we submitted a grant application recently to have the stormwater containment ditch and berm cleaned up, because as you can see, the pictures depict that it's pretty overgrown and there's a lot of fuel in the area. And this is really near the regulator. There's our engineer Kevin and Pat McGreevy illustrating the proximity to the water line with the work effort that some folks had been doing in the past. But as you can see, we need to get in there. We need to clean that out and eliminate all of the material that actually gets into that reservoir. There's a lot of work that we need to do in order to prove the overall water quality coming out of the regulator. And then just some nice pictures of the first snowstorm of the season. West Point, both the clear wells on the left and then the backwash return basins on the right. And that's it. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Good job.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. May I just pause for a minute and talk about lunch? Because we have quite an agenda, and so
Let's get on it.
that's already.
We could wrap up open session and do that at the same time. Does that work?
Okay.
Because I think we're almost done. Right?
Damon, I have one question that I highlighted here in red. Oh, it's yellow. On page 6, there's a
Drawer, get rid of that red pen.
item under electrical 30, wrote a new district-wide voice radio program and uploaded it to 10 new truck radios. Who wrote that radio program?
So that would be our supervising electrician. Yeah, Brian Crumpacker, yep. He does a great work.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So he codes, and even when we pull a radio out of an existing truck, because that's some of this work, they're actually radios that we already own, we pull out of an older truck, and then he reprograms with the new program to put into the new truck.
Did you teach him how to do that, Jeff?
No. I could barely.
Yeah, he does great work.
Radio.
My compliments to him.
Yeah, I will let him know.
All right.
You're keyed up.
Oh, okay. I'm on. I'll be brief. I just passed around a written report, so I won't repeat everything that's in there. I'll just say we're still, I think we're recovered from the PSPS events, but we are still evaluating what we need to do to prepare for next year.
I'd like to see a cost evaluation.
We'll provide a final total cost as well, yeah. It's been a busy couple of weeks of travel, very productive time at the Calpelra conference. Stacy, bless you, met our labor attorney, Gage Dungy, down there for the first time, and Stacy and I went through some pretty intensive labor negotiations training. It was a very, very productive conference. Mountain County's Director Adams is not here to receive the kudos, but he deserves some kudos for organizing that event. It was a very good tour and a reception that evening. And then Aqua last week, obviously, as I said, it was really nice to see so much attention being paid to PSPS, headwaters, forest management, issues that are really important to us. And so we want to continue to be, push that agenda. I don't know, let's see. Damon talked about the vehicles. I think we've got all 10 of the vehicles that we're scheduled to get this year. And are we targeting 10 for next year as well?
That's the hope.
Yeah. So it puts a big dent in the age of our fleet, and we should recalculate the average age, because I think before we started this program, it was over 12, 13 years. So at this point, we should recalculate and see how we incrementally move that number up.
What do we do with the trucks that we took offline?
Most of them are going to be surplused. There might be some that we can repurpose and use within the district, but most of them will be surplused.
The brand new ones are absolutely beautiful. They
Yeah,
are
so we have
just-
I believe it was 7 1-tons and then 3 Ford Ranger service trucks that we just got. And I think that's about it for me. I guess the other piece of it is we will be contacting each of the directors to schedule those town hall meetings, hopefully here in the near future. So, thank you.
Okay. Board reports.
Can we start?
Uh-huh.
I'll be real quick. I went to the IRWM meeting November 20th. It was a combined JPA and WAC meeting. And talked about, we did an extension of the call for projects that are to be included in the plan. We went over the tank projects that are being submitted for funding and tried to rate those, but didn't go real well. And then the DAC technical assistant proposal agreement, we went through that and approved that. And then went through the Sierra Institute assessment review draft. Again, we went through it last time. They didn't make as many changes, if at all, from what we recommended for the previous month. So that's going back to Lindsay to send off with the changes again. And then I left before the other items, but they did review the SPIT program. And we had a watershed coordinator grant and IRWM presentation, and that was about it. We won't have a meeting for December. Next one will be January.
I have nothing to report.
How much time do I have?
You
Very little.
can do it next time.
Next time? No, I just want to draw attention to this letter that we got from the San Diego County Water Authority, the president of that board, our board chair. It was in my packet. Did you get this letter?
They'll send it to the board president.
No, I just think that, we have a new president now, and if you didn't read this, some of you read this, they're welcoming the delegates or the participants in this, the Aqua Conference, and this particular paragraph struck me. They talk in advance about everything that the San Diego County Water Authority has accomplished, and there were some of the things that they have on their wish list to accomplish in the future. But this paragraph says, yes, these are bold ideas, and no, they may not all materialize. Speaking to your point. Okay, this is the meat of it, but we know that our predecessors had the foresight to envision the present that we enjoy today. We owe it to those who come after us to plan for a future that is equally bright, ensuring the livability and economic vitality of this place we call home.
I like that.
That is brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
What a fantastic statement.
Yeah, can we all
I-
have copies of that, please?
I-
I'm gonna
you-
read that somewhere.
You had it in your packet,
Oh,
I
it
think, yeah.
Did
But
we have it? No, we didn't have it.
See?
you didn't?
Usually they
Oh,
address
oh.
something to the board president.
It
That's
goes to
easy.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, you should, I'll give you a copy, you can write it down, give it back to me. But I think that succinct statement really encapsulates why I'm here.
I like that, yeah.
It's obviously, it's why he's there, but, I don't know, maybe we ought to, at this board retreat that we're gonna have, we ought to
Yep.
revisit maybe doing an amendment to our mission statement and something, because that touches everybody. I mean, anybody in the county,
Yeah.
if they believe that statement, they ought to have more appreciation for what we're trying to do for them.
Can we send
Okay.
it up to our state people too? Let them
Yeah.
learn that?
And then I'm happy to report that I, along with Director Ratterman, completed our sexual harassment prevention and board member and managers training. And even though I may have written permission to hug Bertha. I can't do it because somebody may see me and think I'm a terrible person, so, you know, I'm apologizing in advance. I'll never hug you again, so. Maybe not, so. But it was a worthwhile effort, activity, required, of course, but it was worthwhile. Enjoyed as always, I enjoyed attending the Aqua Conference. It was great. So that concludes my report, unless there's any questions.
I have several.
No, and there are a lot of us who are hugging people, and it's just, you know, I'm not changing.
Well, you
Yeah, but
should.
you know, part of it could be if somebody out there doesn't like it, they're gonna go to their HR,
Yeah.
and the HR will come to you and say you can't do it because it offends somebody, end of story.
Okay, all right, I'll
So
wait for
keep
that.
hugging until somebody
Yeah,
says it,
I'll wait for
as
that.
long as you have your written.
Written approval, yeah.
Okay, the only thing that I have is to bring your attention to the fact that UWPA has their board meeting this coming Monday at 5:30, and let's all
Okay.
try to attend.
We'll leave it at that.
What's going on?
Is that good? Okay, the next board meeting, Wednesday, January 8th, and then next one is Wednesday, January 22nd. We're ready for closed session. Oh, well, what about the sandwiches? Oh, we're gonna, oh,
They're
okay.
coming. Ask for public comment on closed session.
Oh, okay. Oh, I have to tell the closed session.
You don't have to tell
Oh,
it,
I
you
don't
just
have
ask
to-
for public
okay.
comment.
May I have public comment on the closed session? No? Now I read it?
Yeah, now you can go find your sandwich. Are we done?
For now.
Yeah, well, it's all written, so, it's all written.
Sorry, I didn't mean that. It's just, there's a reception for